Good evening, everyone. Thank you for waiting for a few moments. I would like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. There will be a special Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, January 19th. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Tuesday, January 26th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. Good evening, everyone, and thank you. Chairperson's report, real quick, just again, thank you for everyone for their time, their comments, parents, other boards and committees for a very productive budget day on Saturday. I think we went through a lot. We kept it on schedule and was very productive. So thank you. I will open it up for public comment.
Good evening. If you have any questions or comments at this time, please raise your hand using the blue icon and the facilitator will call you, unmute you, and recognize you. Mr. Dunn, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good evening. My name is John Dunn, and I live at 175 Raymond Street. As the Board of Ed convenes tonight, I would like to briefly reiterate what I heard from many other concerned parents during the public comments following Thursday's meeting. Darian parents want transparency and consistency from Superintendent Adley, and the vast majority of fellow fathers and mothers that spoke want our children back in the classroom, one of the safest places our kids can be during this pandemic. It is my most sincere hope that Superintendent Adley heard those concerns and, going forward, will seek to be far more open in his decision-making. As I said on Thursday, these types of decisions should not be made behind closed doors. We need full transparency now and in the future. The Darian community deserves nothing less. During the meeting on Thursday, we were told by Health Director Knopf that last week's switch to remote learning was due largely to the concern over the number of gatherings over the holiday break. If that is the case, I would then ask, why is there a continued need to have, conveniently or coincidentally, depending on your view, a professional development day this Friday before the 3-day Martin Luther King holiday weekend? Additionally, there is another professional development day on February 12th. This is the Friday before February break. If town health officials are concerned about social gatherings when schools are on break, isn't extending holiday weekends and vacation weeks just encouraging more of that very unhealthy behavior? And haven't our children missed enough time in their classrooms already? I would ask that the board and superintendent consider changing these to in-person learning days. Let's keep our kids in school. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
There are no more raised hands. Oh, I take it back. Jacqueline Miller, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, my name is Jackie Miller. I live at 84 Fitch Avenue. During these extraordinary times, I'm thankful to the board and the administration for the thoughtful consideration you've been giving to the district's transportation policy. The addition of Bus 25 to the Darien bus routes has been a huge step forward, but the busing policy as a whole remains out of step with the other districts in our DIRG, and it's time to address that issue to better support the students and the families of Darien. I look forward to seeing this issue discussed on the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Any additional comments, Michelle?
Excuse me, Mr. Dunn, do you have another question? I see your hand raised again.
I do not. I'm sorry. That was by accident.
Okay. We have no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Yes, good evening, everyone. And while we have had sort of 2 meetings since we've been back, let me just extend a warm welcome back to our families, students, and staff. I hope everybody did have a safe, pleasant, and socially connected winter break. I too would also like to express appreciation to the members of the community who participated in Saturday's Super Saturday budget experience. Thank you for your comments, and indeed thank for people's comments over the last couple of meetings on a variety of matters. Please know that we do take those under due consideration. We certainly were excited to open our doors again this week to welcome back our students and staff. Everybody was excited to see each other and to be back. And I give them, again, it's just a testament to the flexibility and being able to move between different modes basically seamlessly. So thank you to everyone concerned. This January, I'd like to recognize, along with some other accomplished musicians, John Raskoff is a high school sophomore, and he has been entered into the competition across the US and overseas. He will join the best of the best for the National Association for Music 2020 Virtual All National Honor Choir. John is a tenor in the high school tutor singer, so we offer him congratulations. We did send out some parent letters apprising parents of grades 7 through 12 for the administration of the Youth Asset Survey through Thriving Youth and the Community Fund, and that will take place in the last week of January, first week in February. I'm pleased and deeply appreciative to share that at an upcoming meeting, the Darian Foundation will graciously be submitting a gift request to help fund a K-12 robotics club in the district. Oxbridge is broken ground and is moving forward. Thank you to the parents this week, as you have come accustomed to some new parking routines. We appreciate that. There is a finance subcommittee meeting this Thursday. Friday, as we've just said, is a professional development day with a focus on a variety of content area topics, social and emotional learning, and collaborative times with teams. Monday, the district will be closed in observance of Martin Luther King holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adler. Moving on to approval of minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on December 8th, 2020, and the minutes of the regular meeting held on December 8th, 2020? May I have a motion?
I think we need a correction or an addition. I think we had one member who needed to leave at a point, and we just need to note that in the minutes. Oh, sorry, you're in the wrong one. Sorry, I was on budget meeting, I forgot.
We split these into 4 motions. So there's this
Oh,
and then
okay, you
3
have
more.
it. As long as you have it, you guys can. Yeah. Sorry.
So I'll repeat that. That's all right.
I'll motion to
Okay,
adjourn.
thank you, Mrs. Achman, and second by Mrs. Stein. May I have a motion? Thank you, Deb. Can't seem to get that down. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. A motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting held on December 21st, 2020. May I have a motion? Mrs. Parent, the second, Mrs. Stein. I will abstain as I was not here at that meeting. All those in favor? Other than myself. Thank you. A motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting held on January 7th, 2021. May I have a motion? Mrs. Stein, a second, Mr. Maroney. All in favor? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting held on January 9th, 2021? May I have a motion?
That's the one that will be as amended, where I need to add a departure time.
Yeah, you need a
Okay,
motion to
Sure.
amend.
okay.
Deb, can you get the mic? Okay.
Making a motion to amend the minutes for the January 9th meeting to reflect the time of departure for David Brown, which I believe was 3:15.
Correct.
Anybody second that?
I second that. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank
Sorry,
you.
who was the first? You were the. Well, I made the motion, and
Deb
then I
made the
think
motion, I seconded.
so I amended the minutes. Now we have to approve the minutes as amended.
So I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended of the special meeting held on January 9th, 2021. First, Mr. Brown, second, Mrs. Achman. Thank you. All in favor? That is unanimous. Wow. Thanks, Deb. Moving on to presentations, moving on to board committee reports. Mrs. Stein.
I just want to let the public know the policy committee tomorrow, our meeting has been postponed, so it's canceled for tomorrow. We'll let you know as soon as we reschedule.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Any other board committee reports? All right, moving on to presentations and discussions. Dr. Adley, Darian Public School status update.
Well, we just got the status update. Well, sort of on Thursday, we had this discussion at length with our health officials, but just a wee update since we have come back, just to give a little sense of where we are in a couple of matters. And I also want to just talk about the hours and the days in terms of makeup. So obviously we assured we came back in all in for elementary and hybrid for our secondary students. The data that we have since we came back, there's about 37. A couple of kids have come off this in terms of just played out. So you probably have 37 as of today. Today's numbers are 6 cases and 5 quarantines. So I see Alicia on there, and I'll just ask Alicia if she wouldn't mind, just so it's not a late communication, to feel free to communicate that to parents. So it says January 12th, but it was January 11th that was dated. So today's we have 6 more COVID cases and 5 people quarantined. The data in Darian, the most recent data in Darian, sort of dropped slightly here from 37 on December 7th. It was 37.8, and it's now 34.1. And the data in Connecticut also dropped, as did slightly the data in Fairfield. Actually, the Fairfield, I beg your pardon. The data in, yes, I just want to make sure if that's correct. The data in Connecticut and the data in Fairfield both dropped slightly. We have about 600 between December, just the last date, December 15th and today. They're having around 600 remote learners. So early on, we started out at about, I think it was like September, way back September 3rd, it was 250 or thereabouts, and it's slowly crept up. So clearly there's a population who are concerned. I'll speculate about health and wellness, but so we're around about 600 students now who are in remote learning, which is challenging, and doing, particularly when you're in a hybrid mode, doing both of those particular models. So we will continue to monitor that. We'll continue to have discussions with public officials. But we have, again, about 50 people when we came back who have tested positive for COVID. Regarding the number of hours and number of days, we are comfortable with our middle school. We are comfortable with the high school. We've been reviewing with staff a proposal for the elementary school. I spoke to the State Department of Education today. I have a meeting with the State Department of Education this week. I feel as if I can bring something forward. I don't want to bring it forward if they're not going to support it, but we have a proposal to bring forward, and we'll have that meeting by the end of this week with the State Department. So we've tried to address that. It will involve some asynchronous work, likely on the Friday afternoon, but we can give you the full description of that. I just don't want it not approved by the State Department before presenting anything. So we've made some progress in that particular area. It's been a short couple of days, so that's in essence the update for the board this evening regarding.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Yep.
Alicia, sorry, I meant to ask this last week, but I was reminded by another parent today. Now that we've had more people testing positive for COVID, the questions are arising with the travel guidelines changing to allow someone who's tested positive for COVID within 90 days to not be subject to the quarantine rules. I think I'm saying it right. How does that impact somebody who's tested positive in our district if they are then contact traced to quarantine? Are they required to quarantine out of our schools, or how are we handling that? Does that make sense?
So yes, I think anyone who has tested positive for COVID is exempt from quarantine for 90 days from their positive test.
Okay.
So we have a record of that information, and if we contact trace and there's somebody on that contact tracing list who's already tested positive, they do not have to quarantine. It's a little more complicated at the elementary level because we tend to quarantine an entire class and the teacher. So for the elementary level, those kids will not be quarantined, but they won't have a class to come to at school. So they'll still do remote learning during that time, but they are not quarantined from their regular activities outside of school.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Cini.
You're welcome.
Dr. Hadley, the growth in remote, can you give any comments whether or not that's being driven by Middlesex or the high school, or how is the percentage distribution amongst the three different levels of public school played out in the remote
Yeah, we
learning?
can get, Chris, you have some of the details of by grade level.
And maybe I'll give you the background to that
Sure,
question.
sure.
I've been hearing a number of comments and frustrations around the hybrid model, anecdotally within my own household, but well beyond. And I'm just wondering if we're getting any feedback in the difficulty and the complexity of hybrid in those older learners, and whether or not that's playing out with them basically saying I've had enough and going remote.
I don't have a definitive answer to that. I would speculate perhaps there'd be some of that built into that, but I would have to look into that further to be more specific about it. The hybrid is difficult, no doubt about it, for both students and adults, teachers.
Mr. Tranberg, do you have that breakdown with you, or?
Yeah, I would, generally, there are more students who are remote learners at the secondary level than the elementary level. The elementary levels from the beginning have been more stable. Whenever there's large variance, it's usually because entire classes have needed to quarantine. So you see spikes here and there. But in general, the numbers have gradually increased at the secondary level across all grades 6 through 8.
So pretty even distribution
12.
between 6 through 12. You don't see it more in the high school vis-a-vis the.
Not at a glance, but I can crunch the numbers a bit more.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Tranberg, that's come up pretty much at every meeting. I would ask that you add kind of a graph on that so the data is just as part of this opening. I think it's something people are interested in seeing.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. It just
Great.
will always be volatile data because every time there's a class, it's going to, it skews it very easily.
But it'll give some idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just to maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, I'm hearing from high school parents who've had kids that are going to school at the high school that it's a ghost town. So I'm wondering if there's a way we can, we have people quarantining because of, but right now it doesn't seem like many are quarantining from exposure to students that tested positive. So I would love specific numbers at the high school that are remote. And if we have maybe a little bit of color as to, is this by choice that they've just decided, I want to be remote right now, and how many of them are choosing remote? Because I have heard from parents of high school students that the last couple of days, I know we're hybrid, but there haven't been many people at school. So I'd like to understand a little bit more who's choosing, and do we know reasons why? I do know some people haven't even returned from wherever they were with the holidays.
Thank you. Mrs. Achman.
So I think what everyone's kind of getting at is, what do we have any kind of broad brush picture of what it would take to get to a full return to school? Would it be state numbers coming down? Would it be Fairfield County coming down? There are definitely complexities with remote. There's definitely people who flourish or don't in remote. I think there's been some interesting comments, but also some comments like, where do board members stand? You know, I certainly think that both board members, educators, and administrators all stand that kids get the best education when they're in school, but it's affecting difficulties. So what are there any broad strokes you can share with us at this point of what a return to school might look like, or what factors might provide indicators for what that would be?
Well, certainly the indicators locally in Fairfield County, in our school, in our town, in Fairfield County, if they continue to drop, that is certainly an encouraging sign. I think what we're seeing in the school, there comes a point where also a little bit, a small number of kids is maybe not ideal either to service in some ways, right? So it kind of, the reverse may also be the case where there's so few kids and children in school that it essentially defeats the purpose of the thing. So that may also be an indicator. And also what I'm hearing from principals who actually are on the ground in terms of what they're seeing and feeling in the school. So again, it would be an ongoing discussion with Alicia and our other two medical advisors, and that's a weekly discussion that we have in terms of trying to assess the situation.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. And just building on that, do you envision if we were to go hopefully back into school full time at some point, would you potentially think about doing MMS separately from the high school, or do you think that they're together in one lump sum?
The middle school and the high school?
Yeah, so it's like potentially could the middle school be full in and the high school remain hybrid, or vice versa?
Both of those scenarios are possible, sir. Yes.
Mr. Brown.
I had a question on the SEAC, and then I had a couple of questions for Alicia. Did I read that right? I know people got excited, but nothing's official until Thursday in terms of what happens for winter sports.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
All right, but there's a thought they may go from the 19th.
Correct.
Alicia, quick question for you. Looking at trends, I know there have been some thoughts we might have a spike after Thanksgiving. There were some thoughts we might have a spike after the Christmas and New Year's holiday. And I was looking on the data at the trend lines for the indicators for Fairfield County in particular, which all seem to be trending down for the 14-day average. Am I reading that right? That things locally seem to be on the downswing?
I think that things are on the downswing. I just haven't seen that over the past several weeks in Darian. As far as our numbers are concerned, we had just kind of looking at rough data, we had about just around 100 cases for cumulative right before Christmas, and now we're at 158 total. So we've had another 50 cases just in the past 3 weeks. When you kind of try to separate that data out a little bit, you see that there are probably 20 to 24 cases at the high school, like half of that. And that's based on gatherings and through contact tracing. That's what we can kind of determine that those were kids that were together.
Sorry, I just was going to ask you to follow up. It doesn't seem to be the travel related spikes we were fearful of.
We are seeing some travel related spikes as well. People coming back and surprised that they've tested positive. Okay. But I don't know the exact number of those.
Mr. Maroney, do you have your hand up? Okay, good. Dr. Adley, I would ask that in the plan that you're working on in the conversation with the state, in order to get the conversation out there around days and hours, as part of the plan that's being looked at, include looking at winter break, spring break, extended school years, and these Fridays. I think that understanding that and having that conversation sooner than later, so parents understand from a planning perspective kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah, we're not going to be touching essentially days in the vacation area, because honestly, you don't, teachers have a contract to work, so you'd have to increase their contractual time anyway if you're going to do that. So that's really not probably on the cards at this particular point.
Okay. Mr. Brown.
Sorry, I was just reflecting on Ms. Ocken and Ms. Parent's comments or questions about some of the process for reopening. And I guess the thought that comes to mind is, and I know we don't know until Thursday, but if we're going to go back to sports on the 19th, could we maybe open the schools on the 19th? Maybe it's good enough for sports. Why can't we have people in the buildings? I think we've heard a lot from parents and people concerned about mental health and other things. And if it's okay for sports, which isn't as critical as learning, some might argue, then maybe that would be a good time we should consider opening the buildings to all our learners.
Well, I would just add that in the fall, we also were hybrid at some points with sports still in. So I don't know that it's a direct corollary, but I would support Mr. Brown's statement that the goal, as long as it's safe to bring kids back, is important. But I do think in the fall, we had a successful activity season for kids, and we were in hybrid at times. So whether that contributed it to being, I don't know that there's a direct corollary. So I just think our fall was a good example. We got time in school, which was great for kids. Kids got activities, which was great for kids, and hopefully we can merge the two with the best outcomes.
Good. Thank you.
Certainly an encouraging sign.
Any further? Yes, Mrs. Ritchie.
Well, just to build on that, because the message that came out was from the Connecticut Department of Health that we received. They're supporting the move to resume sports. So I guess just to be clear that came from the Connecticut Department of Health. Right. And what we're waiting now is on the athletic conference authority to rule on sports actually moving forward.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Cini.
Sorry, not to belabor this point, but we use that primary data, cases per 100,000 within the town of Darian over the last 14 days as the primary indicator with a bunch of secondary indicators. I mean, should we be looking to that 25 number that the state had laid out as the trigger to look at more distant learning to get the kids back in? Or like, I think people are looking for some sort of indication.
I don't know those numbers. Those numbers are really, in fact, they're very clear to not necessarily use those as discrete barometers, because who thought we would have been in the red, like, so to speak, like that we'd be functioning the way we're functioning. If we were doing that, we would have been totally out by now, where we're not totally out. So I'd look at that number, but I'm certainly, it's just not a definitive number like that I would look at, but certainly in that range is something to look at. Yes.
Thank you.
I would just also ask, and maybe Marge, this is information too, how are we doing with substitutes and our needs around those resources as we have teachers quarantined or teachers out? Where do we stand from a staffing standpoint?
We've been able to cover partly with the help that we got when the board reached out to the community, but also because of a significant effort by the remaining teachers, as I think I mentioned on Saturday. Those who aren't quarantining are coming to school more often than they have in years past.
Okay, good. Thank you. Any other further questions from the board? Mr. Maroney?
Yeah, is there a thought to do similar to New Canaan, do a hybrid plus model or anything like that?
Well, my understanding was New Canaan was going back on a hybrid plus model, and that didn't happen. So the concern about the hybrid plus model for me, which actually they're not in at the moment, right? Their main concern was actually, could they actually get into like a hybrid model at all this particular week? That's the challenge they face, as opposed to bringing more children back. The concern with that is just, that's not like we're happy to look at all sorts of options. The concern with it is it just mixes up all the cohorts. We've tried, essentially mixes up the cohorts that we've tried to protect, and it's very hard to protect any cohorts at the high school. Once you bring another cohort on top of the children who are already there, now it gets even more complex, and we have limited opportunities to have cohorts at the high school. But at the same time, I certainly applaud anybody who can continue to incrementally bring back students in the school. And certainly that's our intention too, where we can do that.
Mrs. Othman.
A lot of what we've heard is really concern for how students are doing. And I think all of us at the board, sorry, maybe with the exception of Mr. Maroney, actually have kids in our schools right now. And as Mr. Sweeney indicated, we even have personal experiences. So certainly parents who are talking to us, we're living it too. Can Mr. Tramba or Mrs. Klein talk a little bit about what are the eyes on the kids? What are we, kids, whether they're remote or hybrid, how are we making sure they're all actually accessing their curriculum? You know, is it guidance? Is it teachers? Is it SESs or case managers? Like, what's the holistic approach to reach kids who usually you see in a classroom every day, and now you might see 2 days or only on Zoom? Or I just want to make sure there's care for kids.
Yeah, I'll certainly start from the general education approach. Is the first point of contact that students have is with their classroom teacher. So whether they're seeing them twice a week or they're seeing them every day at the elementary level, or if they're fully remote, that's like who we would rely on as the first point of contact to make sure they're keeping that relationship and letting us know, and then following processes that we have in place if there was a concern.
And if I may just add to that, Chris, I think with our special education teachers and our related service providers, there's already a very close, intimate relationship because they work in small groups or sometimes one-on-one. So they're able to really check in daily just to make sure that kids are connecting or having difficulty connecting, what they can do about that. And I also have learned from colleagues, from teachers, from related service providers, how they've used some of the seesaw and different programs that we have to really check in on kids' work and check in what they're doing, and use the electronic connection as well. So office hours are one way with some of our older children, seesaw and some technology with some of our younger children, and real person in time electronically as well when not in person, to ensure that kids are connecting and staying connected. And when they're not, how can we improve on that?
So if parents are concerned, as we were hearing, the first contact is still the classroom teacher, or their guidance counselors or their case manager. Is that what I'm hearing? Like I'm trying to help direct some of the concerns that we heard, like who do I talk to, right? If you call Dr. Adley every day, he's probably not going to get back to you on that day. But who, if you can talk a little bit about that chain of command and who parents could go so they can really solve their problems and it's not every other week, you know, at our meetings.
So
although I'm happy to hear them at our meetings.
For special education's, the provision of services, it would be to the special education teacher first, the related service provider, if that were the first course and it was about that discipline, and begin that and then go through the chain of communication. But it really is connecting with the special education teacher, speech therapist, psychologist. On the secondary level also, it may be a counselor as well, one of the school counselors, but it would be the provision of the service provider. And that's your first contact. And parents would follow that same opportunity in elementary, middle, and high school.
Mr. Brown.
Just as a follow-up, I certainly have seen, and not to do anecdotes, you told me that in my board orientation, don't do anecdotes, but I know I've seen with my kids, you know, fantastic response from the teachers, them doing their very best, going out of their way to be responsive. So I applaud those individual efforts. Thank you. The one thing I do know is that we do have teachers with their own families that they have to juggle, and obviously it's less than optimal to be doing this remotely for some of that. So are there extra steps you're able to take, Chris or Shirley, that make up for that, or other communication to go beyond? Because, you know, it's not the same being in the building, being in the classroom, dedicated, focused, unfortunately, for anybody at this stage.
Yeah, and that's understandable because it's adults and students alike are in a world that no one ever expected. We do build in opportunities in our professional development as well. So in our day coming up on Friday, one of the optional sessions teachers have is on mindfulness. And we also have more sessions on social and emotional learning as well. So we're certainly, I wouldn't say not giving up isn't the right way to say it, but making sure that the importance of attending to the social and emotional learning needs of our students remains front and center.
So part of professional development, giving them extra tools and extra steps and extra procedures they can take in this environment.
Yes, there's optional sessions for that, for sure.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, I echo what Chris is saying. Our school psychologists and our school counselors are working with colleagues to support the efforts for social and emotional connections and finding ways to do that creatively.
Mrs. McKeown.
While it's clear from a lot of what we're hearing from the community, there are many, many parents who would like to have children or students in the building if they can. We do have a cohort who often for medical reasons, whether it's with the student or the family, cannot get into the building. We certainly talked about that. But we know that having a classroom and then a child in remote can be complex for a teacher. What structure have you put into place to support the staff, a staff member who might be struggling with a given class? What happens if all of a sudden we have a parent come and report that this appears to be failing for their child?
Not quite sure I'm understanding.
Well, there are probably cases where we have a student who is in remote for medical reasons, who is unable to access the learning, or where there may be a conflict between the home environment and the school environment. Not necessarily because of any fault on any part, but it's just not working. What resources does the school building have to help troubleshoot a situation like that?
So I can help with that, Chris, if that's okay, just for a second. And I think that was the creative part that I had mentioned before, which is we bring in the resources of our school psychologists, we bring in our school counselors, our social workers. Many of our administrators and colleagues also have those skills of who that child connects the best with and who that family connects the best with. You know, for some of our fragile children, when I said creative, we come up with some extraordinary ways to do that. We have one psychologist who designed with a student a session that they have to make sure that they're working through some of those opportunities between themselves and able to generalize it into the classroom in the larger environment. So I think our clinical staff really helps with that, as well as our administrative and our pedagogical staff as well. But it's going on every day. There is children that connect with their teachers, psychologists, social workers, counselors, or other school personnel to exactly work through that with their families and their students to be able to re-engage or improve their engagement while they're going through a difficult time of remote learning.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the board?
I'm sorry. I have one
Yes,
more,
Mr. Senior.
and it's one that I get continuously asked. You know, the experts have said the younger the child, or the younger the cohorts, the less risk there is to the health of the community within those schools. So would it, at some point, would it make sense to see Middlesex go before Darian High School? And I guess the question is, what is the constraint around Middlesex? Is it the density, the size of the student body within that building right now that is concerning the experts and the administration?
Well, certainly, I mean, the younger children, right? The younger they go, so I certainly recognize that point, and that's an important factor. And the ones that you just talked about, John, the density of the building, the complexity of it, the staffing of it, that just makes it a wee bit more challenging. And they've done yeoman's work up there at that middle school. Just, I mean, I'm tremendously proud of the efforts of the staff up there to really try and make that work. But again, to go back to Sarah's question, it might be that one goes before the other, right? And we may be able to get somebody back, one group back before another, or simultaneously.
Okay, thank you.
I think all the questions the board's asking this evening are very pertinent, right? And your experiences are very relevant and very important to hear, because you're reflecting your own experience as a parent and your own experiences of your children. And just rest assured that if we can get the children back, that our students back into school, that's what we're trying to do.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Adley. All right. Moving on, follow-up discussion on January 9th board meeting. Questions on the 2021-2022 proposed Board of Education budget.
So again, thank you. I sent you this afternoon. Again, not for you to be able to read it necessarily, but just so you can sort of access it and walk through it with us. I want to thank the team for in a pretty quick clip to put this together under the leadership of Richard. And what was done this evening is tried to answer most of the board questions. And with your approval, we'll simply go through those. We've infused a couple of board has for a couple of wee updates, further information on some things, and we've selected a couple that we thought we could sort of do fairly quickly for you this evening. We won't draw it out as long presentations. Yes, Katie.
Before you start, can I just say, I don't know if anyone else had trouble clicking on some of the links. If through our Darian PS email accounts, like I don't have a Google account, if you could send those separately to us as attachments rather than links to Google Docs, because a couple of links I couldn't open.
I literally just found out before this meeting that a couple of people had that experience. My apologies.
So if you guys could just send them separately.
Well, that is more a user area than a.
And they should be corrected now. So if you couldn't before, you should have access now.
Chris, you want to hear that we still can't.
Okay.
There's two, I think.
Maybe as we go for it.
All right. Just.
So with your, what I maybe just propose to do, we just run through these, each question, just since there were questions asked by the board, and if you want to deliberate on any of them, we can certainly elaborate further on those. The STEM update, and we would suggest that proposal is a wee bit more comprehensive, and if we with your permission, do that on January 22nd at a board meeting. What was the impact of one less para? We can't say that it's not reduced supervision. It's one less person. The two library media specialists would then assume the rest of the responsibilities. For the most part, the paras distribute books, oversee the desk, while the media specialists do their work around the library and the teaching and learning part of it. So it is one, look, it's one less person, right? So one less person to do the work. I'm going to pause unless people want to stop me. Is that okay?
Yeah, look, why don't we do this as you go through it? If anyone has any questions, raise their hand, and then I'll call you, and that way we can get through it, but we can also recognize where there are questions. Good, thank you.
The removal of the team taught classes, since it had a sort of a variety of layers to it, we've just deferred that one to the 26th also, because it's more of a comprehensive sort of review for you. Have we turned?
Mrs. Parent.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Thank you for doing a presentation on that. Can you just, when you're doing that, as I don't yet have high school experience, I would just have questions about what happens to those kids. I know that you've said repeatedly that the amount of support at the high school is tremendous, but what about those kids that are in the middle that may not, may just need a little extra? If this goes through, where will those kids get that extra support? Does that affect them? I'm just always concerned that kids are getting the appropriate support that they need, regardless of if they have an IEP or not.
Good. Thank you, Mrs. Parent.
So have we turned students away from Fitch? The answer to that is no. We have not turned anybody away from Fitch at this particular point. It could happen it could happen this semester because students enter in and out, or it could happen the start of the school year. But at this point, we have not turned any students away who were wanting to be part of the program. Have we reached out to other districts? In the past, we have reached out to other districts more aggressively. Since then, many of the districts have created their own in-house experiences and in-district experiences for similar programs. Actually, the program is so successful, I think it has been replicated in certain areas too. I have had discussions ongoing, but it seems that people have other resources within their district that they can accommodate. Are there anticipated mental health needs as we anticipate our students coming back to school? And the answer to that is yes, and we will be working essentially with our cadre of support services and mental health professionals to address the social emotional learning of our students when we come back. The middle school unified sports, it is still in the budget. I believe it's soccer, basketball, and volleyball yes?
And we also had a question about whether or not that program is continuing at the elementary schools as well, because I believe we have one elementary school with a unified program. So there was a question over whether it's still in the budget and if there are any plans to expand.
I don't think there was any plans to expand, and I think it was still in the budget.
Shirley has her hand raised.
Mrs. Klein.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Oh,
Thank you, sorry. Just a question, I did speak with Luke, it is at Oxbridge. They have paused the program for this year due to COVID and cohorting. So it will not be happening in the spring this year. They hope to resume it after when things resume, but right now it is on pause.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein. Yes.
Is that figure in the clubs and councils for Middlesex?
I think it's an intramurals,
or is it?
It's so in Middlesex it's an intramurals, and then there's a stipend in RC11 for the person who kind of oversees and coordinates the program.
Okay, so we'd find that in RC11, not RC3.
You find them in both.
Oh, in both. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. An analysis through the spreadsheet from Paris to lunch monitors at the elementary school, and well, hopefully this will come up for us. Can we get, Michelle, can we get that up, please?
What was the question again, Mr. Radley?
Can we just open up
Dr.
the
Radley?
link? Could you possibly open up the link, the lunch monitor link?
Absolutely.
As we open that,
Mrs. Ackman.
as we open that link, I think the question centers around cost, but also is there a loss of service? So what are we losing? What are we gaining? So if you could kind of walk us through kind of that.
Sure.
Yeah, just to piggyback. Oh, sorry.
Mrs. Parent.
To piggyback off Mrs. Ackman's question, I would just love to know that classroom teachers have the support that they need to effectively reach every student. So I would love to know, does every classroom teacher have access to a para if this were to happen?
Every classroom teacher would not have access to a para. And the question there becomes like, how many instructional paraprofessionals? I think most of our teachers, if asked at the elementary school, would love a paraprofessional, in all honesty. Right? That's not the way we are staffed at the moment. And so I can't say that, certainly the answer is no to the question, right? Everybody's not going to have a para, and they'll see this reduction as further challenging. That is true. So the set of hands that a paraprofessional, a set of eyes and hands that a paraprofessional provides in the classroom is what the teacher will miss if they had them for half-time, part-time of the day, or the other first part of the day, second part of the day, or otherwise. They'll miss that. They always do. I'm not going to there's nothing I can tell you that if you provide, and it's not like a wasted resource by any means, but a teacher would very much appreciate, given the challenges of teaching and trying to address all the children's, they would very much appreciate having always a para. I will say that's not always played out in research. And that's, I'm just saying, it just doesn't play out there in research, and that the trade-off, it's not really a trade-off, that it's always necessary. Let's put it like that. But I also have to deal with this sensitively and tactfully, but there's a lot going on in the classroom, right? So I empathize with the teachers on it. At the same time, I'm trying to listen with this budget too. I'm just trying to be reasonable with any efficiencies and reductions that I feel as if I have to make, or collectively we have to make as a team. This is one of them. What you lose is the person in the classroom. Now, I will also say this: a teacher is a better person in the lunchroom, and also paraprofessional to some degree is a better person in the lunchroom. So I'm not arguing against what we're proposing, but I'm just being pragmatic and honest, right? Someone coming in for a couple of hours is not quite the same as seeing Mrs. Parent as my paraprofessional and seeing that person in the lunchroom. That those all sort of help with the community and social emotional and everything else, right? So I would recognize that too, but not to the extent that I don't think we should do it, because if I didn't think we should, I wouldn't put it on the table.
How is that para's day scheduled or parsed out amongst the school and the teachers?
Chris, do you have this sort of schedule for them in terms of?
I mean, just
No.
at a high level. I mean, you've got.
So
I'm sure that person can be pulled in
yes,
5 or 10 different directions by a school.
Sometimes they could be split. They could be with a teacher, one grade level, or they could be split between a couple of teachers. They are pulled to do morning duty, afternoon duty, lunch duty. They're often pulled to do sit with practically in practice. I would say some of them are also pulled to cover classes where there was PPT. That wasn't really the intent of the paraprofessional, right? And there is a resource for that in the budget. But I think they do they love the kids, they love the teachers, they love helping. I think they do everything, and principals use them.
But it's at the discretion of the principal.
Very
as
much,
to
yes.
What their schedule
Instructional
looks like.
paras, yes.
Okay. Mrs. Achman.
So then can you speak to the gain of what you've proposed?
The gain might be certainly consistency of the people, and it's a two-edged sword. They will be the same people who show up every day, and it's a financial gain. I mean, I just being honest, it's a financial gain.
Good. Are we good to move on to the next?
Did we get the spreadsheet? Or
Yes, the
you have
spreadsheet was
access-
up there.
You have access to
Yep.
the saving, right?
Good.
Some of the things that we have learned through COVID, I'll say to my peers too, my colleagues here on the team, if there's anything that they want to add, please feel free. Clearly, we've come to, which is not a very difficult conclusion about the importance of technology and having a curriculum. The curriculum was essential. I pay credit to those who have gone before me, to Dr. De Silva, to other people who have put curriculum in place in this district. It's a bedrock of of a guaranteed experience for children without it, and it serves the district tremendously well. And I know they've worked, our directors and so on have worked tirelessly over many years to put that together. The investment that the district has made in technology has served this district well. It would have been very difficult, and it would be a wee bit awkward actually if we weren't ready for what just came upon us. You were ready because you've thoughtfully, and other people who have gone before me have thoughtfully advocated, and Board of Education made good decisions in that regard. I think the idea that promoting independence was important during this time, as was though being socially connected, right? Those two things are still critically important, and it profiled both of those, that the importance of being independent, but also the absolute necessity and benefit of being socially connected. I will say that the whole question about the K-2 experience, we scrambled a wee bit for K-2. You experienced that, right? I experienced that. Your children experienced it. The community experienced it, and sort of being ready in that regard. That is why, in part, that we are bringing forward the K-2 proposals in the budget this particular year. We have now committed to a lot of processes. One of the things that, as an example, like Seesaw platform, we never had that, right? And the professional learning of the staff. That's now ingrained in what we do. We can't turn the clock back, right? You can't just, and that is such a great piece of a great platform to use just as an example, but there are other examples in that process. We just can't pull that away. I also learned what people can do working together. And we also learned what two people can do fairly quickly. The amount of professional development we would have needed to do to get the teachers to where they are now, or myself to where I am, or anybody else in terms of like what we have learned, would have been an inordinate amount of professional development. Learning by doing is at times a great adult learning experience to move things, and collectively the community and the staff have done that. So those are some of the things. I also think that the preparedness for secondary level, at some level, secondary level online experiences is going to be a big part. Secondary education is going to change as well. I think they will have new learnings and new opportunities, and there'll be expanded opportunities, online experiences for students as they go through there. So those are a couple of things. I don't know if I've left anything out, but those are a couple of things that come to mind.
Mrs. Ritchie?
Just following up on the K-2 one-to-one initiative, what are the K-2 students using right now as their devices?
So they have the Chromebooks that are they're sharing carts like 2-to-1 between one cart between two classrooms. In classes.
So students don't have access to Chromebooks when they're using them?
Oh, at home they do, because we've the model that we sort of were in was one set of Chromebooks on a cart, right? But we subsequently got Chromebooks for all the kindergarten.
So at this point in time, all K-2 students have a Chromebook that they're using for when they are remote?
Yes.
Okay.
Are we good?
Yep.
Building subs, that is a historical thing. Essentially, the homeschool has had one more, not because it's had higher, not because it's really had a higher enrollment. In fact, I think someone pointed out here that Oxbridge, was one lower. So, but ultimately, it averages out at 2 a school. That person doesn't necessarily stay at that school the whole time. We haven't changed it because on average it's 2 a school. That's the honest answer to the question.
Mrs. Ackman?
So do we experience that third sub floating, or I know they can float throughout all 5 schools, but do we actually experience that, or no, they mostly Holmes has just been able to utilize all 3?
Mark, do you want to just comment, please?
So I think that they float, and from time to time, if somebody has none at the beginning of the year, one of the schools has none, and so Holmes may have hired another one, and then they give it to the school that has none. So that really was just sort of a snapshot. It's pretty fluid.
Thank you.
Good. We're good? Yep. Okay. Can we have more information on the open choice program? So this is where I'm going to just, there's a couple of these wee sections, not too many that it gets real long for you, but I felt as if I could sort of very quickly give an overview. You can take it, read it yourself. We can move on a little bit. I appreciate that this one technically isn't in the budget. We continue to talk about it a little bit, but there's another one or two presentations like this, but we'll move through it pretty quickly. Could you expand that for me, please? Or or can you read that? There you go. There's a couple of areas where the open choice operates, and primarily it's in the Greater Hartford area, down in Bridgeport area, and down in Yale. Okay, so that's their New Haven area. That's really the areas where actually it is established at the moment. It was first established back as a sort of strategy for the 2003 Chef versus O'Neill desegregation settlement agreement, that was a sort of an equitable, the claim was weren't getting an equitable sort of education in the Greater Hartford area. It is a formalization of a long-standing program that goes back about 50 years, which used to be called Project Concern, and that was where districts just voluntarily took students in the Greater Hartford area from Hartford and went to the suburbs, and it was then transformed into open choice program. So as you can see, or sorry, as it says here, it's in New Haven, Bridgeport. They also participate as well as the Hartford area. It's established by legislation, and the reason is to reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation. We have a responsibility in our reporting every year to say, how are we doing that? So one of the areas to actually do that is by actually participating in this particular program. Generally, it's a K-12 program. Not exclusively, though. Again, in the Greater Hartford area, there's pre-K. But in this particular area, in the New Haven area, it's predominantly K students. The program details, there's about 250 kids who participate through CES, which is our service provider. And you can see that the districts that it works with in and around the Bridgeport area. So basically, the students from Bridgeport can go to the suburb schools, and actually the suburb schools can go and take advantage of the programs that are in the city schools, because there are some programs that the kids might want to take participate in. It is a lottery system. You essentially get $3,000 a student. That money increases with increase in the number of participants that you actually take through the program. There's no cost to the parents. Transportation is taken care of by the state. It goes through a grant through Regional Educational Service Center. Special education costs are reimbursed through the sending district. You have to go through the process of sort of reconciliation and agreeing on what those are, but essentially they are reimbursable costs. The status, we are not, at this point we can't participate because we are outside the distance. The kids are just too long on the bus when it comes from Bridgeport. Since we've started some discussions around the Southern Fairfield superintendents, there's tremendous interest from superintendents around this area. The state and the governor, I know, are supportive of it. Legislators we've contacted legislators, they're supportive of it. We're hopeful to try and get something to happen this year. I mean, we've been skeptical in the sense of because the lottery generally takes place right around March time. So I would be very happy if we could get it in place for next year. I'd be thrilled and delighted if that would be the case. So with board members, I would encourage you to join me in that venture and trying to support that. And we may be sitting here, if it's not this year, next year, ready to participate in the program. Again, you can participate, take children anywhere through the grade levels. It would be my recommendation you take the children early. You have the most chance of being success and in the spots where you actually have seats to do that. That's a quick walkthrough. Yes, John.
Mr. Sini.
Sorry.
So at this moment, you're not asking for any sort of approval. We're going to have to get approval from the state before we participate in the program, or do you need an approval from the board to ask the state to participate? Maybe you can help us with that process.
Well, that's a wee chicken and egg type thing. I'm trying to read the board, and my sense is at least you would be open to actually considering that. And it has to go through the education committee. Then it would have to survive appropriations. Then it would have to survive the governor's budget, and then the remaking of the governor's budget. So I wouldn't be a betting man saying that I think it's going to actually happen. I would hope it would. I'm going to continue to, and if it doesn't, there's still significant interest from the parties concerned, and there's also significant interest from surrounding towns. So we'll continue to advocate for it. It's not a big investment. It's the simplest, ready-to-go program. Plug in and play. Biggest bang for the buck and return on investment you'll get.
So do you, I guess my question is, do you want a formal vote from the board saying, Dr. Adley, we'd like you to pursue this program, permission from the state to participate?
Well, yes, I certainly wouldn't want to come back and go like, we've got the opportunity to participate and we say no. So if there was a sense that we're supportive of it, I am trying to take a wee bit of a read that to date you haven't said no to it, and that there's other things to discuss, I understand, but
that's my first question. I would support maybe a formal action by the board at a future meeting, Mr. Chairman. So maybe you can...
Yeah, I think as you know, we've gotten more information this evening. I think people should take away this information, come up with more questions, and then we can have it as an agenda item in terms of our support of Alan continuing to pursue our participation in the program. Mrs. Stein.
Can I just ask one more follow-up? I'm sorry. Sure. Is it only out of the Bridgeport community that the students can attend? You said you're working with surrounding communities. So
there are surrounding communities here who have indicated an interest. Norwalk is one of them. Stamford is another one. They would make a lot of sense in terms of proximity.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry.
Thank
so
you.
we would do a more localized version of what currently exists. In other words,
yes,
we wouldn't be taking the students from Bridgeport because it's too long for them to travel. So we would be looking at a more of a lower Fairfield County program.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist currently.
Correct. Yeah.
Mrs. Stein.
Just one quick question. What is the sibling policy with this? So say it's
the sibling policy. Yeah, you sort of.
How does that work?
Well, you tend to you tend to look favorably upon a sibling policy. If a child is in there, what they try to do is match the sibling with the school district. Over the years, that hasn't always worked out, and one's in this district and one's in that, and you probably have a sense as a parent how this gets crazy. It's not impossible to do that, but they tend to would a district look favorably upon a sibling? That's
okay. Thank you.
I'm actually tremendously excited about this, and actually what's making me excited is the board's excited about it.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Uniform replacement cycle.
Sorry, just lost my place temporarily.
Uniform replacement cycle distributed.
Which, am I over the page? Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm over the page. I'm sorry. Could you just pull that up, please?
Yep.
I don't know if board members can see it on their computer or not. No, the uniform.
Uniform.
We can certainly, if you want to look at that and have questions for next meeting or otherwise, that's fine.
Any questions around this, or just we'll bring up questions as we continue to go through the budget process? The information was requested, so we have it now. Good. Okay, let's keep going.
So the expenses, revenues for YMCA, if we were doing it, so it's basically a net 144. If you want to talk about any details, Rich, that's fine, but it's basically a net saving of 144 if we sort of trade off a little bit and charge each other.
Okay.
Mr. Sini.
Yeah, I'd like Rich to walk us through this, because this looks like a historic barter agreement that has dislocated a bit from a revenue standpoint and an expense standpoint. And if I heard you, Dr. Adley, right, or I read it right, we're talking significant dollars of mismatch. If I, not only in revenues that we've foregone in this arrangement, but also the maintenance expenses associated with it, or our custodial fees. So if you could just kind of walk through it a little and the assumptions you made, that'd be helpful.
So we looked at the 18-19 school year because that was the last non-COVID school year we had. They did use our facilities for a little over 3,500 hours. So based on the recent board-approved facility rates, if we applied that to the same 3,500 plus hours, it'd be about $299,000 in rental fees. There was associated overtime costs for custodians of about $31,000. That $31,000 is already in the board's budget and RC 11. So we do subsidize that cost for custodial overtime. Based on what we were billed this year for girls swimming, it was about $68,000. Assuming the same cost for a normal season for boys swimming and then gymnastics, we would have an expense of just under $155,000. So the difference is that $144,000 in net revenue. This assumes that the YMCA doesn't raise their prices beyond what they charged us this year. I've been told, at least in the past, anecdotally, that when they broached the topic about charging it, the Y's indication was their fee is whatever we charge them, which I guess is kind of where the whole bartering system of usage of gyms versus the usage of their pool.
So,
go ahead, Mr. Sini.
Sorry, I guess the question begs, like from an accounting perspective, this isn't a budget issue, so this is where I'm going off the reservation a little, but it seems like this should be addressed from an accounting standpoint, either whether or not this is proper accounting.
So typically we would show revenue as a contra expense. So we show all field or building rentals as contra expense in RC 12. So you would typically show this in RC 12, which would gross up those revenue numbers there. Then we would have to gross up the expenditure in RC 11 in his interscholastic rental account. And the question is whether or not the rates would stay the same for the Y versus what they charge us now.
Understood.
Mr. Brown.
I just didn't hear the last part, Richard.
So it's just a matter of whether or not the Y would maintain their rates at what they charged us this year, or if they would, as I've been told they did in the past, just say that their rates are whatever what we charge them, essentially to make that fee zero.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Anything further, Mr. Sini, for right now?
Well, I think you addressed it's in a later category, so
okay.
It's related, but later. Thanks.
Okay.
So operating deferrals that we had last year came to about a total of just over 200,000. If we pull up that, if you could just pull that up for me, please, Michelle. We did have expenses in capital of 480, but if you looked at the operating budget and took the 0.2, basically off the 3.99, right? 3.59, or is there a finer number than that, Richard?
So if we didn't have the deferrals, the 399 would be 378, and then the capital budget would go from 23 to 18.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So if we didn't have any of the operating deferrals of the 218,000, the 3.99 that's proposed would be 3.78, and then the capital budget would be the 2.3 would go down to about 1.8 million.
So I'm sorry, so in this you included just deferrals, but you didn't include any, like, we did do some pre-buying of some of our, so that was excluded from this, right? This
Correct,
analysis.
since we actually bought the items, that's excluded.
So just,
go ahead, Mrs. Achman.
sorry, I promised to get better with that.
No, that's good.
So just to do apples to apples, we didn't include the pre-buy, that money would have gone back to the town and would have been in this budget.
So if we did not buy it, then our 399 would be higher because we would have had to put those items in the budget this year.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, good. Any further questions around that?
Later on, probably.
What's that?
Probably down the road.
Yes, good. Well, a lot of this is getting the information out there, and if there's any other information that adds to some clarity around here. But I think that was a good exercise in understanding what was deferred that has to come back into the budget this year. You can't keep pushing it off, some of this stuff. Why are not all sports required to pay 30% of the use of an outside venue?
I'm just sorry, can I just go back to that last item?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Rich. So we also, as part of our process last spring, eliminated a couple of, like, field trip expenses, so that you didn't include in this analysis. But we got rid of some travel expenses.
So the travel expenses, we largely maintained flat for 22. So that's why I did not include that, but I did not include 3750 for field trips.
And we eliminated some transportation for special education.
So that is in here. That's RC 24 ESY buses.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Okay.
Good. Question around sports and the 30%.
So some of this is also getting filled in a little bit, continued about the history. So you may be a wee bit more familiar than I am, but I think the essence of it is our divers couldn't be accommodated at the Y. It's moved to New Canaan. And if they were paying 30%, it's going to be, because there's a small number, it's a pretty significant number. I think that's the essence of it, I think.
I can,
Mrs.
But you can probably.
well, I have a little history on this matter. So the Darian Y did have a diving board, very old, had to be replaced. Unfortunately, when they went to replace the diving board, because of the depth of the pool at the Darian Y, it no longer conformed to regulations. So therefore, our diving board could no longer be installed at the Darian YMCA, and therefore that facility is rendered useless for the divers.
The protective gear. Oh, sorry, Mr.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Senior.
And again, maybe not a budget issue, but now we have an equity amongst sports issue. So off-campus facilities, Mr. Manfredonia talked about the 30-70 split that was implemented amongst sports. It does have a budgetary impact, because now we're not collecting fees from certain parents in certain sports that are operating off facilities that we now have a cost in, while others like ice hockey, skiing.
Can I just add some flavor on the
I'm sorry, can I
swimming?
just finish?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. Sorry about that.
We aren't. So that also now we're not collecting certain contributions from certain teams, while other teams are contributing to the cost of off-site facilities. So again, we kind of COVID kind of opened up the window in terms of defining certain costs of certain facilities. And I think this is something that's pretty important, given that these are public facilities and there's, significant dollars tied to them. So I'll leave it at that.
Mrs. Ritchie?
I'll just add a little flavor on the swim portion that's being paid. That is a result of a Title IX suit that was brought against the school district. There's probably a file in it somewhere. So that was put in place because the Darien girls swim team was not being given enough pool time through the Darien Y. And therefore, to remain competitive with the other schools within Fairfield County and their competitors, it was deemed necessary to give them the pool time, which is down in Greenwich on Sundays, and therefore we have to pay for it. So that was put in place as a result of a Title IX settlement. So I think as we move along in this process, we should just be careful to make sure we have the full history.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. Achman?
So Mrs. Ritchie is correct, and we've discussed these Sunday dive practice times. I want to say every year I've been on the board. It is a Title IX issue. It is separate from other, it's an issue over pool time, access to locker rooms, and in the girls swim team especially. So what you'd really have to be doing is start to siphon off boys swim team by fractional amounts so that they're also covered by Title IX. So it's much more in depth around swimming and that Title IX suit. But the board has discussed this multiple times.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep moving. Dr. Adley?
The protective gear. Well, my understanding of, again, getting caught up with with the history completely, but essentially some of these sports, they have traditionally or historically brought their own equipment and others have not. So I mean, that's the basic answer to that particular question. Most of them, if people need equipment and so on and so forth, I believe there is equipment ready to be distributed to people should they need it. But essentially, most of the protective wear is a lot of it is purchased by the families, and that seems to have served the district well to this point. Or perhaps not. You would tell me otherwise.
Mr. Cini?
If somebody needed or required equipment and they couldn't afford it, the school district would pay for it. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good. And again, I think a lot of that was discussed last time or several times in the whole conversation around sports. So, all right, good. More information on the proposed building condition study.
Rich, you want to just talk about the study, just the necessity for this? Because I think it just feeds into everything that we're doing.
Yep. So the building condition study looks at your short-term and long-term capital needs. It provides you estimates on costs to help you provide a capital budget in the future. It looks at things like site conditions, exterior conditions, interior conditions, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. The size of a study like this obviously would have to go out to bid. Typically, it's an architectural firm that would bid on a survey of this magnitude. Prospective bidders would receive the Northeast collaborative work that we've been working on in the past year to help inform their study. So the idea would be that the two would be in lockstep, but it's really a study to help kind of outline what your capital needs are to maintain your buildings adequately over the next 5 years. The previous study by KG&D was a 5-year study that expired in December of 2020.
And just to refresh, Mr. Rudel, you had the cost for the last study was 100.
So the cost of the last study was about, I believe Mike said, was around 138,000. We did receive a quote from one company, which was a little over $230,000. That was prior to Northeast Collaborative's work, so we're assuming a little bit of a reduction there. Since the Saturday meeting, Mike is reaching out to a couple of architects just to get a couple other quotes, just from a couple other vendors.
And also, I think someone brought it up, maybe Mr. Cini, that we really wouldn't need any work done on Ox Ridge.
That is true.
So that would be eliminated.
That's true.
From the plan. Okay. Mrs. Ritchie.
I'm sorry, I forgot how much have we spent so far on the portable study, the library reimagined, and I guess now we added in there the space assessment study.
To give you an accurate number, I'd probably have to look it up, but I believe it was around $30,000.
Total.
Okay.
For libraries and portables.
Correct.
I would just, we can continue the dialogue. I've gone back and forth thinking about spending $200,000, and I think maybe at some point, kind of an update from Mr. Lynch as to what we would actually get out of that. What has actually changed since we did that? We're building a new school. We've had the work done for the libraries and the removing of the portables and everything that's going on around COVID and what we're trying to accomplish. Is it the right time? What would we lose by pushing it out a year? Because it is a big number. I think Mr. Lynch and his team have intimate knowledge of every inch of these buildings and the systems and the mechanicals around them. So I think it's just something to think about based on the size of the number and the budget, as is it needed? What happens if we push it, if we move it down the road, spend some time thinking about what we actually need out of it and want from it based on the work that's being done now? I just throw that out there. Mrs. Achman.
So Rich, we are talking about a building conditions survey and not a master plan, correct?
Yes.
Hear you because the printer's going.
So we're talking about a building condition survey, not a master plan. So this would be like, what's the state of our facilities now and what do we need to do, which would inform our capital planning for the next 5 years, not a master plan of like, what do we need to build?
So typically, like a master plan would include a demographer, would look at enrollment, whether or not you need to, increase the size of your schools, decrease the size of your schools, things like that. This is strictly a building condition survey.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Just to follow, so what what expired in December of 2020 was the master.
Was the KG&D master
Okay.
plan.
just to be clear.
Go ahead.
Well, the question about whether we defer that or not is, I wouldn't be recommending deferring it. But that to be just further discussed, but I think that's going to serve the district well in the upkeep of the buildings. The schedule, the deferral schedule, I think that's the same as what we had the last time. Sorry for being redundant on that. So that's fairly straightforward. So the Chromebook, the tech plan, we have a few slides here. Mr. McGettigan, Dr. McGettigan's here just to share a couple of things about K-2 to try and frame that, and we can answer those questions simultaneously. But Joan, are you there?
Yes, I am, Dr.
I
Adley.
see you. I'm going to just turn a couple of slides over to you, and if you just talk to the board about the plan, where we are and what the plan is.
Not the tech plan, the slide deck. There we go. Thank you. Good evening. First, I would like to provide some background as to why we advocate supporting a school-issued one-to-one program. If you could go to the next slide. Thanks. So this type of program provides equitable access for all for remote learning, which I think we're all in favor of. School-issued devices reduce the need for teacher tech intervention. This type of program allows teachers to differentiate both in terms of how they teach and how students demonstrate their learning through multiple modalities. The one-to-one program provides teachers with valued formative and summative assessment tools. The one-to-one program facilitates standardized testing, certainly. This type of program also provides the district with the ability to monitor devices in compliance with our acceptable use policy, which would not be the same if we had privately owned devices. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so while we have been one-to-one grades 3 through 12, as Dr. Adley mentioned earlier, before COVID-19 appeared, changing our learning environments, we were not one-to-one from pre-K through grade 2. The situation that we had is we provided 1 cart of Chromebooks for every 2 classrooms. That's roughly 2 students to each device ratio. During COVID-19, though, we moved as rapidly as possible to provide each of our young learners with a Chromebook. We would like to maintain this 1-to-1 ratio for K through 2 with Chrome tablets. These tablets would maintain the Chromebook environment, but it would be housed in a more appropriate format for our young learners who really don't need to have a keyboard until they hit maybe 2nd grade. These tablets do have the ability to have keyboards attached to them. The Chrome tablets, if we could go to the next slide, thanks. The Chrome tablets will be used to access digital tools such as Seesaw that Dr. Adley referred to before. These are going to be part of the embedded parts of instruction for skill development, independent practice, and assessment. The Chrome tablets will provide young learners with multiple ways to demonstrate their learning, and they will further develop fine motor, literacy, and communication skills. So that's that answer to that question in a nutshell. Are there any other questions with that I could answer?
Mrs. Stein.
Can I ask a broader one-to-one question? I brought it up when we were going through budget cuts in the spring. If we are, and I agree with your arguments for one-to-one and why it's the better model, and we are investing in these devices, is there a thought then to make it mandatory?
I'm sorry, to make?
Using school devices versus bring your own device. Mandatory, so that we don't have outside devices in the schools.
It certainly does make the lives of our teachers much easier when that is said and done, and certainly, because I assume that you are referring to the high school.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah. The usage rate at the high school for the iPads, by the way, that was an earlier question. I think it's down the list is 81%. So COVID changed many things, but yes, it would be perhaps a good idea to consider having that a mandatory environment. As you know, this year we started to invest even more in professional learning for the faculty at the high school, and they've done simply amazing things. They've really mastered so many different tools and using them at a much deeper level. So having a consistent device in every student's hands certainly makes their life a lot easier, and I think makes the learning environment that much more compelling.
Well, and it's a big investment on our part as well. So thank you.
Mr. Stein, I think that this year was, I can only speak for a year removed, but this year was a year of really committing to that. Once we committed to the iPads at the high school, we also can't service all the computers, one-to-one computers that the children bring into. So that's, but yes, if we're purchasing those, there has to be a commitment from the district and from the staff to actually use that as the device, and that's what the commitment is.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. As a spending close to a decade in first and second grade classrooms myself, I get a little wiggly and antsy about having additional screen time for our youngest learners, and I really value the pencil to paper connection. And can you talk to a little bit about how much would this change the curriculum, and how much time do you see the children would be spending on a screen during a day? I just think I would love to understand a little bit more of what changes we would see on a daily basis when we're all back into school in a normal environment.
So Mrs. Parent, are you referring to K through 2?
Yes, K to 2.
Okay. Certainly that's always a concern, right? For young learners, play is the best way to learn. But what we've discovered this year, and I'm really just so proud of our faculty because they've really taken leaps and bounds in terms of mastering so many different kinds of skills and ways to use technology in a way that's authentic and makes sense. So it's not a tremendous amount of screen time, but it's very meaningful use of screen time. And toward that end, they've really discovered the power of it in independent practice, being able to have students who are very young learners be able to use the tools in Seesaw to be able to record their thinking, to be able to capture their learning in different ways. It gives teachers further insight into what is going on with the students. So it's proven to be really valuable, but it certainly would not be expected that every K through 2 student would spend hours on devices. That certainly is not something that we advocate, but we do advocate for the authentic use of technology in ways that helps provide additional learning pathways for those students.
Great, thank you.
Mrs. McCammon.
Thank you for that explanation. Can I ask for some additional information? Because I appreciate independent practice, recording thinking or capturing learning, but also knowing that those are children who can't type or write or have very rudimentary reading. Can you expand on what you mean in more specifically for our very youngest learners, please?
Sure.
Can I jump in a little bit first? Because I wanted to add on, Dr. McGettigan, to your last one. Because this is something I've thought about a lot too. And to your point, more screen time for our youngest learners, that's not always the most desirable thing. The way that I've thought about this over time, because it's come up in over many years in many places, is with K2 learners, I think about technology as what are we doing in addition to and what are we doing instead of? And there's a lot of instead of that we can't give up. Like we don't want to lose the fine motor, and we know the learning and the connection that students have with paper and pencil for the students that have access to those tools. But there are times when there's tremendous efficiency to be gained with technology, and some of those examples are with check-ins. And if kids click a button on Seesaw and they can check in with a reaction to show how they're feeling, so the teacher has in seconds a response to how everyone's doing. You get quick snapshots of things instead of having to get to every student for the purposes where you don't need to get to every student that way. You can then use that data to conference with a student that you know you need to, because they either have a misunderstanding with content, or you know that they're not doing well that day because of how they checked in with an emoji, perhaps, for an example. I just wanted to add to what you said, and it might dovetail into any response you have, Dr. McGettigan.
Sure. So as Mr. Tranberg mentioned, in Seesaw, the tools are really well equipped for young learners. So there's the draw, there's the record tool. These are super easy for those young learners to use, and they're able to capture their work and reflect on their work even at those young ages. And so it helps on many different levels in terms of developing those skills, in terms of developing reflection skills, communication skills, and also, as Mr. Tranberg mentioned, the efficiencies. You know, so if I have 18 students in front of me and I really need to get a quick read on if they are understanding the lesson that we are just talking about, if I need to get a quick read on where they are social and emotional learning wise, if I need to get a quick capture of the learning that just happened because this lesson went so much better than I expected, and I just want to be able to capture all of this and maybe house all that material in a digital portfolio so that I can share these great experiences with parents. That's one of the great things about Seesaw, is that it does allow for this connection to families and helps them gain further insight into what is going on in the classroom. In terms of some of the other tools that the teachers have been using, such as Book Creator, Nearpod, Flipgrid, and Padlet, they just present so many great ways to bring the learning in, to be able to get students involved in creating stories that they can actually do authentically and appropriately at that age. So with drawing tools, recording their voice, being able to bring video in really easily, it allows teachers to get, again, those further insights into what's going on in those little minds that maybe you could not do just in pencil and paper.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So I'm struggling a little bit because I think at the end of this, when we're in the clear, we're all going to need a technology and screen detox. And I understand, of course, the necessity for every child to have a device right now, but I am struggling with the one-to-one for our K-2 learners, just because there's still so many things that they need to learn with touch and feel. And they need to learn how to write, they need to learn how to read. I saw the K-2 learners struggle with their Chromebooks because they don't know how to read. They didn't know how to navigate their device. So I'm just struggling with I like the Chromebook carts because they were there when we needed them. I understand now that we need them because we're in this environment that requires a device. This is just my personal opinion. I'm just struggling with giving too much screen time to our students. And I really hope that we have a day where we don't need to be staring at a screen all day long, because it's not good for our social emotional health. That brings my question. We have Chromebooks in the hands of every K-2 child in our school district right now. That's 1,018 or 1,020 devices, because that's what we're asking for new devices next year. What happens to all those existing Chromebooks? And can we repurpose them? Can we sell them? I see on the slide pre-K, are we also moving Chromebooks into the ELP program?
We have not asked for that for next year. Certainly having Chromebooks to those families certainly helped during COVID-19, but we have not asked for that for next year. And I believe that Mr. Adams may be able to, I think Mr. Adams is on. Jeff?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Would you be able to answer the other part of that question as to what happens to Chromebooks who are near the end of their life?
Yes, absolutely. These Chromebooks are at end of life as of next year. And once that occurs, the operating systems of the Chromebooks will not update. And what happens, what results from that is that certain software will not work. So we will have Chromebooks that will turn on, however, will not execute some of the software that is out there. So they are essentially useless to the district and will need to be recycled.
So, Mr. Adams, is there an opportunity? How do they get recycled? Is there a resale value or a donation value? How does that work?
Unfortunately, no.
No.
There's no value to them at all.
Okay, Mrs. Achman. Thank you, Jeff.
So I think on K through 2, what's important to recognize is the tablet is the tool. So we approve the curriculum, but the tablet is the tool. Now, I do think we're being asked to make a significant investment in a new tool. So we have to understand how the tool is being used so we know whether it's a wise investment. But there is a difference between us approving whether a teacher uses it other than our desire to invest in the actual tool. What I often find is when we've brought new tools or resources into the district, where we sometimes get hung up is, have we explained to parents how this tool is used and how they can access it at home, right? I mean, I think, again, all of us have children. We've all had our kids say, I don't know, it's in Google Classroom, which kind of locks a lot of us out unless a child can get in it. So at the K2 level, I think it would even be probably more frustrating to parents if they don't understand how to access it, because they really still are helping and coaching their kids at home with things like homework or what'd you do in class today? And that's where the paper and pencil, you know what they did, you can see. So I would just say, I think this board has a decision around, is this a tool we're willing to invest in the classroom? But then I also would urge the administration to really go out to parents, and if this tool is in there, help them explain how they can access it and use it with their children. Because I feel like many of us have heard over the years that that's sort of one of the frustrations, like I can't see my kids' work anymore. And we get that at the board level, but it's not really anything we can do about. We're making a decision on the investment. So food for thought as we go
I think
through
that's a good observation. The district did try and reach out, particularly around Seesaw and some of these other pieces of software with workshops. So I think that carries something that we should do. This is a wee bit of, look, it's been thrust upon us too. We can't give we have to have one-to-one ready for the children. This may not go away, right? So let's just call it the way it is in that regard. I don't think any of us are going to say, let's not have one-to-one devices for the kids. This is also, I just want to make clear that this is the tablet, right, version, where they can put a screen, a keyboard to it if they need to, but essentially it's a tablet. The other thing is the accessibility of these. I guess I should really know the answer to this, but my assumption is that they won't be going home too much at night time, right? For the very younger ones, that they will be predominantly in the classroom. The ability for a teacher to use those when he or she is ready to use them, as opposed to sharing between classrooms, is also a big benefit. And the bottom line is, we have them anyway. We can't wind the clock back on this stuff here. So it just seemed to be a perfect time to consider doing that.
Mrs. McCammon.
So as the parent of a kindergartner, I will say I agree with you, Dr. Adley. I think the horse has left the barn, and these kids are used to having devices. So I think whatever the model, we're at the point where they're used to working with a device at their desk, and I don't know that we can go backwards. That said, I do believe that it's really critical that hello.
Sorry.
That's okay. That they get used in the right way. I am the parent of a child with a disability, and I'm familiar with the wonderful ways that technology can empower children who don't have language skills in the way that some of our older learners do. So I think there's some real opportunities there. But I also recognize that that these are very young learners. They don't have, it is a lot of screen time. They don't have the executive function to make good decisions. So, you know, I do believe it's time to roll it out because I think it's done. But I think that it is critical that it be done well, that we use it, but that we use it effectively. And I agree with your framework, Chris. My thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. McCowan. Any other questions around this? Good. Let's keep moving.
Thank you, Dr. McGinnigan.
Thank you. Then Jeff.
Oh, Jeff, sorry. Sorry. So the other answers to the questions there, I won't read them all. I'll skip a couple because I think you've read them. And the devices, the number of devices, we have like 106 sections. There's a number of devices that we purchased. We've also purchased for a few other teachers for the total number of devices that you see there. Could the technology be moved to capital? Well, given Mr. Davis's counsel the other day, the individual devices don't add up to the capital limit, so to speak. And answering both of these questions, there's a variety of districts that have experienced the purchase of these sorts of devices as capital. I have to say, I haven't worked for many, many years in a scenario where it was always under capital, was always a nice thing, a nice benefit actually in many ways. That's not always the case. And there are some districts that do and some districts that do not. The impact, oh, sorry, you want to pause there? Sorry.
Yeah, just could you clarify? So these districts put all of their technology into their capital budget?
Well, I can only talk from my own experience. Capital purchases, certainly devices, yes. The devices would, all sorts of devices, yes. Richard, you have experience in this area?
Their equipment, so like New Canaan and Norwalk, which are referenced in the document, their equipment goes in capital.
Mr. Brown.
I'm sorry, I just missed it when we scrolled down. It was talking about a usage rate of 81%. I just would like some drill down as to what usage rate means at some point. I'm sorry.
It just was simply as somebody logged in.
Somebody logged in.
It just simply logged in. Unless Mr.
Is that daily, weekly?
Mr. Adams, you're there. You've got I thought it was just that they logged in, but getting the.
Yeah, I don't need it right now.
No, he's right here. He's right here. Mr. Brown, you should be able to answer.
That is correct. It's if an iPad logged into the system.
One day a week. Is there context to that, Jeff?
No, it's just we measured from mid-December till now. If the iPad had checked in, then it is soon used.
Although, given that includes break, that's
Thank you.
impressive in some ways.
Well, good or bad?
Are we good?
Yeah.
Are we good?
Jeff, does it differentiate about, is it just you don't know if they are using it multiple times or if they just used it one time? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Jeff, is there technology or anything out there that you need? Because this question repeatedly comes up, and I think a lot of it's tied to people that bring their own devices, tied to curriculum. Is there anything out there resource-wise that you need that would give us a little more in-depth view on the usage of those devices, other than, you know, from September to December, 81% of them were turned on?
We do.
You don't have to answer that now. I mean, it's something maybe you come back to us with, but.
Yeah, we do consistently look for tools that will help us, and we know this comes up regularly. But because the iPad is so proprietary, there are very few tools out there that'll help us with this data. So, but we'll continue to look.
Mr. Brown.
So sorry, just to follow up to that, you know, it's my strong belief that technology should be driven by the curriculum. But in response to this question, the 81, I am going to ask a device question. For instance, if we had some of these books that the staff has, the Surface books, would you be able to track with those devices what the usage is a little more accurately?
Yes, we could.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Ackman?
So just as a reminder, and I don't know that Norwalk and New Canaan work exactly the same way, but anything in our operating budget cannot be cut line by line. Anything in our capital budget can be cut line by both the Board of Finance and or the RTM as they choose fit.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. All right, let's move on. DAF Media.
So the answer you didn't know I could do that, did you?
He likes DAF Media.
So the DAF media experience has impacted the media studies at the high school. That was really the conclusion of that, to the point where I think it's the 29th or 26th when we come back for the new courses, you'll see a modification of the course at the high school where it will more align to some of the skills that the DAF actually provide. So they'll be integrating more of those skills in. It's somewhat literacy based at the moment, and therefore those who are looking for technology perhaps took that benefit and experience elsewhere. And so there'll be a wee bit of calibration of that curriculum coming before the board. The next set of questions, with your permission, I'll ask Shirley to walk through. She's got a wee couple of slides, just the same as we had, and we'll talk through those for the SES and address. She can also address these questions simultaneously. Mrs. Klein.
Good evening, and I don't know if Michelle can click on to my opening, but good evening again to members of the Board of Education, school community, and colleagues. As an update to Saturday, the elementary school principals, Chris Tranberg and Kristen O'Reilly, tried to review and update some information that we wanted to expand on, and we'd like to present this evening. Of the professional responsibilities of the additional assistant principal in the elementary schools. If I may just for a moment, just take the opportunity of what that addition brings with it. And the opportunity that an assistant principal will bring for exemplary practices and supervision. Not yet, Michelle, still front page, sorry. Engagement of students and families and partners and outcomes. Before we begin, and I apologize because Michelle is kind enough to move this for you, but Michelle, I'll just ask to move when we get to that. If you can go back to the cover. I didn't mention this on Saturday, but did want to take a moment this evening just to preface an update of some relevant historic information regarding facilitators and administrators here in Darien. Prior to 2017-18, there were SES facilitators at middle school and DHS, if you recall. In 2017 and 18, the SES facilitators were eliminated on the secondary level, and special education chairpersons were appointed to MMS and DHS. The secondary special education chairpersons over these years have focused on maintaining regulatory compliance, improving instruction, providing administrative support to staff, and providing expert supervision and evaluation that has strengthened teaching and learning and promoted exemplary student outcomes. And I just wanted to make sure that I had that moment to share historically for some members who may have not recalled that. Okay, now I'm ready, Michelle. Thank you. First, regulatory compliance, the first slide, again, we spoke briefly, so I'll just update that the AP would share the meetings. They would continue the same responsibilities as SES facilitator had, which was to facilitate the coordination of the IEP progress, to review and finalize documents, and of course, to monitor all compliance and fidelity of IEPs consistent with the IDEA. Next slide. One of the biggest differences between a SES facilitator and an assistant principal as administrator is supervision and evaluation of specially designed instruction. What this assistant principal would provide is expert supervision and evaluation with actionable feedback to non-certified staff, special education teachers, and related service providers, Also, observation and evaluation of the actual instruction in the general education classroom and special education classrooms. And they would calibrate with their counterparts in both general and special ed and teachers to make sure that inclusive educational practices were in both environments. Improvement of student outcomes is always the role and the goal of what we do every day. And the focus for the assistant principal will be on instruction. Again, the difference between assessed facilitator and administrator is an administrator has the opportunity to really focus on instruction to evaluate, observe, and change teaching and learning. So in the classrooms, they would be responsible for supporting specially designed instruction, both development and implementation. They would really be knowledgeable in the grade level content and the instructional practices in both general and special ed. They would provide expertise in specially designed instruction to improve teaching and learning and thus student outcomes. And of course, really look from environments from special education programs and classrooms and the general class environment to make sure that students were generalizing those skills from environment to environment, actually from home to school as well. Next slide, Michelle, please. Again, consistently to foster collaboration, to plan and facilitate professional learning communities, to develop workshops for colleagues on professional development, to collaborate between their SRBI counterparts and special education to make sure that we are supporting students in both environments with best practices in measuring student achievement. And of course, to collaborate with the building-based administrators, our program directors, and myself to realize shared goals and district initiatives. The other outcome is enhancement of building administration. And again, the difference between a facilitator, who's a teacher or a speech pathologist or a psychologist, and an administrative assistant principal is they really do carry the role of instructional leadership. They really bring with them multiple perspectives and specialized and supplemental instruction in both environments, whether it's the general education classroom or the special education classroom. They have opportunities for instructional leadership. They can yield exemplary practices and improvement of student outcomes by modeling and practicing and working alongside teachers, by demonstrating exemplary practices and by leading the way in instructional opportunities for students, and again, in both special education and general education. The efficacy at attendees of PPT meetings is they'll no longer need to be two personnel. Currently, there is an assessed facilitator and an assistant principal or principal at each meeting. It would eliminate the need for the assessed facilitator. And of course, and most importantly, as we plan and as we grow in Darian, to assist in staff recruitment with an expertise in SDI, to really look for new teachers who are coming in and joining us that have that expertise and that understanding and can be supported when appointed to Darian. I lost the, Michelle, I have a black screen up. Did I freeze?
I believe so, Shirley.
Okay, so am I frozen?
No,
We see you.
can see you.
Okay, and I'll just use my hard copy because luckily I have a hard copy. So, oh, it's back up. So on strength and engagement, this is a continuation and clearly facilitators were very successful in this. And you know, back when they designed the SES facilitator position, this was foremost and essential in strengthening engagement of students and families as partners. And at that time, clearly that was one of our, and still continues to be one of our essential goals. And SES facilitated this very well, as would our assistant principal. But the idea of consultation to support families and be available in the special education process and informed, to engage students and parents and school administrators in problem solving as we look in a perfect time right now during this COVID and pandemic time, are really finding ways for kids to connect and kids to engage and to work with their peers and with our staff. To have information sessions for students and families and training and workshops for parents, informing them of critical issues in special education. And again, efficacy and response time to families by having an additional assistant principal that would afford that opportunity. And lastly, this is not, actually there's a citation at the bottom of this document. In looking at practice in other districts, we did go back to, it was actually Westport, back in 2017, I had the opportunity to read a comprehensive review of their special education administrative structure from their school, which has the 2 assistant principals. And here is an excerpt, just a paraphrase from that report that really says what extraordinary opportunities they had in the building model that they have, which really focused on precisely what we're saying: instructional issues, administrative support for special education, high quality supervision for teachers, enhanced outcomes for students with learning differences. And what the model does allow, and has been evaluated and assessed by CES, is that the district had an unparalleled and personalized academic experience for students with needs. We're hoping to be able to replicate this model and are confident with our staff and our families will be successful together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein. Anything you wanted to add there?
No, other than the additional other questions that went with that. I think if you want to talk out loud about those, Shirley, do you have those in front of you, or do you want me to talk about them?
If you could just read the questions. I don't have them in front of me and I don't see them.
Just the roles and responsibilities of administrators under SES assistant principal model. You know, basically the role of both assistant principals.
I entered that in the document. I don't have my hard copy there, but the document was there.
Yes, yes, it is. You can just talk to it though. That's fine.
Okay.
Or I can. You're good. That's fine.
If I can see it, but I can't see it, but I know that it was really.
That's fine. I can talk to it. This one of the concerns was this person, this assistant principal, is the only person who sits at PPTs. That's not necessarily the case.
I would like to speak to that. I'm sorry to hear the question. Absolutely not. Principals and the other assistant principal will continue to sit at them. The primary responsibility for this assistant principal, because of their knowledge, his or her knowledge and expertise, will be to the majority of those PPTs. But no, it will not prevent, and there will be many PPTs that the principal and the other assistant principal will be participating in, with families they already work with and new families in the future.
Okay, you're on a roll. What about the training for this role?
And if you give me the question, I give you the answer. And I did hear that, so that was fine. They'll have to come with an 092. An 092 means they've had experience either as a special education teacher, or as a speech and language pathologist, or as a psychologist in this field. So they come trained. They come with professional development in those areas, and we'll be looking for people with expertise in SDI. And given their backgrounds, we're confident we will have candidates both in-house, and other candidates will be applying for the position. May I have the next question, if I could see it?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Ritchie got a question.
Oh.
Go ahead, Mrs. Ritchie.
I can ask it at the end, but it was just.
Yeah, let's just finish with all the information that they want to get out, and then we'll open it up to questions. So request to put a schedule showing the cost of APs versus SES over the next 3 years.
And Rich has provided that.
That's something you can pop up there, Rich, or?
It's in there if you can click on that.
So you'll see, as we showed in the budget presentation, the differential is about 146,000. It shrinks a little bit next year because there's some step movement in some of the current SES facilitators. And then it goes up a little bit in 24. We are assuming 24 because there's no teacher contract for fiscal 24, the same terms as the fiscal 23 contract. It does spike a little bit because we have the individual SES facilitators who would be at top step, and they would only receive that top step GWI.
Good. Thank you, Rich.
There was one other question just about, will the cost, will costs increase in special ed? And then the overview, there's one other one somewhere.
No.
I think the cost increase in special ed due to eliminate team teaching is kind of a separate conversation. In staying on SES, it's overview of what other districts are doing with the SES assistant principal, which Mrs. Klein gave some insight to that from a Westport standpoint. Is there anything else to add to that?
We did reach out to the other districts also, and we'll follow up with an update. I actually have a Durgay meeting tomorrow morning, so I'll ask them to reach out. Kristen O'Reilly did some work online today, but we'll follow up with some of the other opportunities.
Okay. So I'll open it up to, I think that gets through all the questions on the SES facilitators and the assistant principal. So I'll open it up for any board questions. Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. So we heard from the community that there are concerns that this model would create a less inclusive environment than there currently is. And how do you alleviate those concerns, and what would your answer be to those community members?
If anything, I can't imagine it being anything than more inclusive. I think right now, I'm not quite sure what the concern was as an administrator. We have a SES facilitator who doesn't have the authority to implement and change instruction to promote excellence in SDI, to do that because she doesn't have the authority to do that. If anything, this is an assistant principal who will be in the general education classrooms, who will be working alongside general education teachers in showing SDI and working on differentiating, is making sure that there aren't two schools of a separate special education and general education school. They are merged and together. So if anything, it's more inclusive. With the authority to coach, to work with, and to work alongside their peers. The AP currently right now, and if you just juxtapose it in each building, works in both environments as well. They're in the general education classroom and they work at PPT meetings. So it won't be remarkably different than now. So I don't think I would compromise any inclusiveness. If anything, I think it would allow instruction to really become more robust in the general education classroom with someone with specially designed expertise and that background to really bring it into the general education classroom and not just limit it to the special education environment.
Thanks.
Mrs. Ackman.
So I really took to heart those comments about inclusion, because as these SES came to be, the whole goal was inclusion. And I don't know if my thinking's on this is right, but I really spent a lot of time thinking about this based on the public comment. And kind of where I landed is we have specialized teachers, right? We recognize all teachers should be versed in the needs of special education, but we have specialized teachers. In central office, we have specialized assistant superintendents. We have the superintendent of curriculum and superintendent of special student services and special education. And so I don't know why doing it at the building level would feel less inclusive. I would welcome comments to help educate us if people feel that way. But I really, I think what it might do is bring more knowledge base to maybe that level, and that's always helpful. You know, as a board, we have to talk about it and decide again, is that where we're investing? But I wrestled with this a lot after leaving on Saturday, and where I landed is it might be at the building level that we need that administrator with that expertise to bring that voice. I don't really have a question, but since I thought about it so much, I thought I'd share my thoughts, unless anyone sees huge flaws in my thinking.
No, but that's a great segue, if I may, Ms. Ackman, to and just to using, and Kristen O'Reilly is here right now. So if I can just move on to secondary just for a moment. When we did shift from SES facilitators in secondary, and I'll just use DHS for an example, and since Kristen is here and is now working with us in elementary, we having that person with expertise that Kristen does. Kristen is by discipline a special education teacher, came into DHS in her capacity as an administrator and helped turn around instruction of teaching and learning in all of our programs. And it wasn't just limited to our special education programs. It was in our co-taught classes. It was working alongside all of our general education teachers within the whole chairperson model, working with our ELA department, our math department, our humanities department. It really shifted teaching and learning over those years that we couldn't have done without someone with those expertise. And what I mean by inclusive, because like you said, I'm not quite sure why someone would think it would be less inclusive. If anything, it just supports teaching and learning and differentiation for all students. And it changes student outcomes. And we've seen it. We've seen it work in both Middlesex and in the high school. And we'd love to have the opportunity to show that kind of, commitment to teaching and learning for all our students in elementary school.
Mrs. McCammon.
So picking up on that question, because I've also been trying to process this one as it relates to a couple things. Assuming the reason that when we switched at the high school and the middle school over to the department chair, we still have our principals or assistant principals as the administrator of record in the PPTs at the secondary level, at least as far as I'm aware. I haven't done one in the high school. So I'm curious, could you please compare why we would be changing, why are we not using a department chair model, which would effectively perhaps do some of what you're suggesting, but doesn't change the administrator of record in the PPT. And I can speak to why it matters a little bit from an inclusion perspective. It matters that the principals, all the principals, own your kid. And I wish that I could be really, really rational about that, but I'm not good at that part.
If I just may add that, but the assistant principal would still own, and I'm just to use your language, Jill, the new assistant principal would have that same ownership and responsibility and commitment to that student. It wouldn't change with the additional person. It's just that in addition to that commitment, has expertise that can really change teaching and learning. And if I may answer the first part of the question also, when we first put in our chairpersons, and the board was kind enough to offer us one for middle school and one for the high school, our emphasis was on teaching and learning and really changing and having robust instruction. We actually now are looking at, they do participate in PPTs, just so you know, currently as well. But we're looking at, balancing now that we kind of have really built a strong foundation of instruction, where we're looking at being more active and more participating in chairing meetings. But just to go back to your first part, the same way I chair meetings at times, Scott chairs meetings at times, Kristen chairs meeting at times, the person would be one of our team. It wouldn't change that. And honestly, both Christina and Ross Taylor, as well as Teresa Fox, have been chairing as well. Not as much as we're designing, but it is increasing.
So to round that out a wee bit, let me just share that one of the greatest privileges I can recall is as an assistant principal serving special services, and as a principal serving special services. And I can say from that experience, no principal will ever give up his or her connection to the population of special students who need special supports. It's one of the greatest privileges you'll have as a principal. Yes, meetings can be like long and frustrating sometimes, right? But upon reflection, it's one of the most gratifying experiences that you will have is trying to assist families and children. Why not the department heads? I'll be pragmatic as well. This is a budget, right? It's also cheaper. It's less expensive than a department head. And I'll just say to you, you get the added benefit from it. The assistant principal label, for the want of a better term, actually will provide more. Just provide more to the position. It's actually convenient in some ways. I hate to say it that way, but I'm just being honest about all the factors that roll into it. But I would say to our population of parents who are concerned about this, I don't think you have to be. I always have felt that when assistant principals weren't there and weren't engaged in the process and infused and working very closely with it, I always thought it was a disconnect. It's just as the reverse. It just brings the population together. No one's going to be any more about inclusive than I would be. And if I thought this was going to make separations and walls and silos, there's no way I would support that program. I don't know if that helps, but anyway, it's just perspective.
Good. Mr. Maroney.
So I just want to read something from the GAM report that says,
Dennis, could you mention what you're reading from again?
This is from page 76 of the GAM report. So it seems to be in contradictory, but maybe it's my understanding of it. But it says the chairperson and the district representative roles. Consider establishing different roles for chairing PPTs and for district representatives, and having the chairperson be an IEP facilitator rather than a decider. This would enable the district representative, to listen to the conversation and be an active participant. Consider training all potential chairpersons in the IEP facilitation process, which focus on consensus building.
I also read that report actually when a parent brought up, I went back and read the report, and I'm on page 76 of that document as well. So I would love to respond to it. And again, in Susan Gam's report, it really is, the notion is to consider. And I will tell you, at having sat at PPT meetings and CSE meetings for decades also, I can tell you with assurance that the notion of the district representatives listening to be part of the conversation, everyone at that meeting is part of the conversation. And I'm not quite sure because I wasn't there when this document was written, but in it where it says having a chairperson be an IEP facilitator rather than decider. One, and I think I mentioned this on Saturday also, decisions are based on a multidisciplinary team. There is not one decider. It is reached by consensus. The notion is when we are at a meeting, we are all participating, we are all listening. Actually, sometimes the person who's taking notes, it depends on how you decide if someone's taking notes. That can be somewhat distracting if you're the note taker. So we balance it. But I think in her consideration, I can say in response to page 76 that the administrator who's at a meeting is the person who will be listening and paying attention as all the other multidisciplinary team members will be, and will reach that decision. I don't see it as distracting. So I would beg to differ on what I say. It said consider, but that we're not seeing that it would be a distraction.
Mrs. Ackman.
I think
this building is,
in a PPT, I would agree that you can have a chair. And sometimes if you don't know the structure of a PPT, it might be clear. Mrs. Klein might be chairing the meeting. You could have an AP in it from, sorry, I see Luke. So I'm going to say Ox Ridge in the meeting. But Shirley's going to be all over the district. So she might chair your PPT, but now your assistant principal is going to enforce with your teachers. Enforce might be the wrong word. Support, enforce, make sure there's compliance. So whether it's our current AP or it's a principal like Dr. Bourgeois or it's this new AP, your chairperson is not necessary. There's not necessarily only one administrator in the meeting. I think the concern, which I brought up on Saturday, was, are we having too many building administrators in a PPT? And so this might help that. But the chair of your PPT being an administrator might not negate, nor currently does negate, your CES facilitator being in that meeting. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. And may I just add to that, Tara, and also to Mr. Murray's point, things have changed since the GAM report also. And I think at the time the GAM report was written, PPTs might have looked very differently. And I can't speak to that, and they might have required a different balance for reaching consensus. But if I can just, as a segue to what Tara was saying, and this probably for those who have not been at PPT is probably the best way to describe it. So this is how the referral process goes. When you children, after you're assessed and there's an evaluation conducted, you go through assessment and observation. The next part is the PPT, where you really, if eligibility is determined, you develop goals and objectives. At that point, that's when the CES facilitator stops. She stops by, she finalizes the document and puts that together. But what we pick up in the middle part after goals and objectives and recommended programs is the next part that happens, which is the development of the program, the evaluation of the program, the monitoring of the program. That's when the administrator who has those expertise comes in, and it goes beyond what the CES facilitator can do right now. So that person is the person who evaluates, observes, promotes, and works alongside colleagues to make sure that the program that has been developed based on those goals and objectives is not only being implemented with fidelity, but is really rigorous, really meets best practices, really supports, and you see progress from in terms of student progress monitoring. So that's what the difference is. It doesn't stop at the PPT. This administrator allows it to go on into the classroom and manages it and monitors it in the classroom. And that's an extraordinary opportunity. And we saw it happen in middle school and high school. So we're just asking to have that opportunity. Again, recognizing the extraordinary efforts of CES facilitators. They really did succeed at what the design was of that model, but we really want to go beyond that. And that's about implementation and teaching and learning and instruction and SDI in the classroom.
Mrs. McCammon.
So I'll add one thing. I appreciate you bringing up the GAM report, Dennis, because I think it was a really important document at the time. And I'm grateful to the people who have harkened back to it. I do think one of the things that a lot of us in this room can celebrate from wherever we were sitting at the time is the change that's happened. I think one of the key reasons that we needed a facilitator was we were having a lot of problems with predetermination. And I really and sincerely, I haven't heard, but I really and sincerely hope it is true that we don't have that now. And so there was I think one of the risks was that the decision maker was making those decisions before they got into the room. That's what predetermination is. So you hope that we have also achieved enough here in our processes and the ways that we work and in our culture that we can consider, I reserve the right to consider, but that we can consider different models.
Thank you.
Any additional questions around the CES facilitator and the assistant principals right now? Mrs. Ritchie?
Mine is really just an org chart question. So just to be clear, both an assistant principal and the SESS administrator, assistant principal, can be present in those PPT meetings, or the building principal. But there could be meetings where only the AP, the SESS assistant principals in that meeting. So there could be various different scenarios. In other words, we're freeing up some of the assistant principals' time. So I'm trying to figure out, they're not gonna have to be present in those PPTs. So they're gonna have time to do other things in the building, which was explained to us on Saturday. So they don't have to be in those meetings, but they might be.
So there's always a building level administrator at a PPT.
Right.
Now
But there could be the new assistant principal now, the SESS assistant principal would take that role as the administrator, building administrator. Is that correct?
So I'm not quite sure the question, but the CES facilitator, who's now is now a non-administrative position, many of them will apply for the position. So they may be.
They would be the administrator. Once that is elevated to administrative, they would be the administrator in that meeting.
If they were to become the assistant principal.
So we could be freeing up time for principals and vice principals.
Yes, exactly.
And my other question is just an org chart question. Do they report directly to the building principal?
Yes.
So are and I'm just envisioning a lot of coordination with the other assistant principal in terms of roles and responsibilities and how that works. And that would be established by the building principal.
Yes. And the other assistant principal currently does report to the principal, and this would have the same expectation.
Thank you.
All right, good.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll continue to have, thank you, Mrs. Klein and Mrs. O'Reilly. Thank you very much. A lot of good information and follow-up. And I'm sure there'll be more questions and more follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will costs increase in special ed due to elimination of team teaching?
We do not anticipate and see a reason for that to happen at the connection.
Okay. Questions around that? Enough budgeted OT, PT, and speech to make up services lost during COVID?
And I think that's the answer in there, Dr. Adley, I believe also based on our PPTs and our what we see our students articulating into different programs, we believe we have enough funds at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Klein. Mrs. McCammon.
Shirley, have we covered PPTs for most of our existing students? I mean, how comprehensive is that number if it's based on PPTs we've done to date?
And thanks, Jill, for the question. We're really projecting because no, we haven't. We've caught up on a lot of PPTs. So where we're looking at our students and we're knowing, again, it's an estimate. And that truly is an estimate. But we're knowing that we have to allow enough additional funds because the notion of having to have, change frequencies, change group size, change durations. So we've allowed for that. In anticipated PPTs, we have not yet had. We've gotten that feedback from case managers, from related service providers. So to our best ability, I think we have this covered. Now, I could come back and say things have changed, okay? But we really have reviewed everything we can, knowing where, if we're halfway through our PPTs right now, that's where we are. And then we've kind of encumbered and anticipated the rest. Thank you.
Good. Better understanding of the minority recruitment program in the partnership with CREC.
Yeah, Margie's going to take us through that. Appreciate her advocating for this particular program and bringing it to potentially bringing it to the district. So the couple of questions here, Margie will deal with her presentation. Thanks.
Okay, and being mindful that it's 9:50, Michelle, we're going to go right through this presentation as quickly as possible. So on the next slide, it gives you some very underwhelming statistics that in 2017 of all the teacher prep programs in Connecticut, only 22 teachers of color were certified. Only 8.4% of the Connecticut teacher workforce are teachers of color. So CREC has begun this program, which tries to minimize the barriers to the traditional certification program admission. Some of those barriers are standardized test scores. Some of those barriers are the inability of potential teacher residents to go without working so that they have to have a program where they're being paid and can learn at the same time. So they do work here for 1 year with a consistent cooperating teacher, and they're guaranteed employment at the end of the 18-month program. If we don't have a position here, we work with surrounding towns in order to help find them a position. They commit to 18 months of coursework. They have to be around the whole summer. It's evenings, weekends, and these are the courses that they take. It's similar to a master's in education, but they're specially designed through CREC and offered by teachers who work in and around the RESC system. So on the next slide, CREC for its $10,500, and I just want to be clear that if this were offered through CES, it would still cost $10,500. It wouldn't be covered by our membership fee. It's a separate program. They agree to screen resident applicants. They will train our mentor teachers, train our principals, and provide ongoing support over the 18 months for residents and for the district. On the next slide, it shows us that Darian in return agrees to keep that teacher in a consistent classroom, and that's how it differs from an intern. With an intern, we can move the intern around to cover for paraprofessionals or teachers or anybody we want, except for the 10 weeks that they student teach. In return for that, we pay $15,000 to $16,000 of their tuition. This teacher is in a classroom, so that classroom is quite lucky to have two teachers in there, but they have to be there for the whole year. We will participate in the recruitment, screening, and selection. There needs to be essential services contact who will be responsible for working with CREC to implement the program. We'll make the payments that are outlined in the budget. There's a summary slide on the next slide. And again, offer the teacher resident a position. We've also agreed to send out a flyer to our staff. There may be uncertified staff members who would like this chance, people of color, and we also will publicize it to the community. And so the last slide just, recaps the costs that Rich had in the budget book.
Michelle, could you just go back to that last slide?
The cost?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And Marge, just to confirm, because I think these questions came up the other night at an RTM meeting, CES does not have this program available.
No,
So
on the
that's
CREC website, it says that CES wants to participate, but even if they did, the cost, the partnership fee would be the same.
Okay. All right. So I'll open up to questions. Mrs. Achman.
So also what came up in the education meeting was some concerns about how we talked about this position and people of color. And so I'd just like to be clear. I think for those of us who are advocating for maybe offering 2 of this position, as CREC recommends, is we could get a higher caliber candidate, is what I toss candidates, because there is a desire from what CREC has told us for people to do this position in a dual situation. And so if we were speaking about it glibly, I don't think that was to do anything. In fact, maybe it has to do with how we all talk about race. But I think what we're trying to do is find a way to make sure this program succeeds. If we're bringing it in for the stated purpose of making sure there are more, people of color within our district that have a role mentoring our children's lives, then we are trying to do it, or we're trying to ask questions of, is this the way we do it? And what's the best way to do it? Should we choose to go down that? So I think it was meaningful to hear those comments at RTM Education. So I just really wanted to kind of set the record straight. Those of us who are advocating or asking questions about maybe this position, at least for me, I know that's where I was coming from. I know Mrs. Stein, I think, was talking about it. I'm sure that's where she was coming from.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So
I apologize.
to clarify, because I think it was kind of a good, enlightening conversation on RTM Education.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so to build on that, can we go back to the first slide? Because I think the question is it even feasible to get 2 teachers? Because, yeah.
We're not looking for certified teachers.
Okay. But do we think based on this slide, will we have the opportunity to get 2 if we wanted to?
So this program is brand new in Durg A, Fairfield County District. So the HR directors have been talking. Everybody wanted to, different budgets or whatever, so that even if we don't each get 2, which would be CREC's preference and our preference, we're going to work together with surrounding districts to make sure that this group is a cohort and to make people as comfortable and welcome as possible.
Okay. Thank you. Good. I think that's a great, thank you. Great overview, Marge, in a timely manner. Mrs. Ackman.
There are also questions brought up, and I think it's terminology. This candidate, whoever it might be, is guaranteed employment the following year, but that is not the same as tenure, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there was definitely some confusion of terms there as well.
Okay, good. All right, to Marge's point of the time of the evening, let's keep moving.
I think, yeah, I only have one question, Mr. Chairman. I think Marge killed it. I think Marge killed the intern question as well, so.
Yes.
I think there's only one left.
Yep, good. Budget control?
So we've used budget control. I think it's 3 out of the 4 years. I don't know if totally, given how many were in a particular year, but we certainly used it this year. And you can see the history there.
Okay. Mr. Sini.
Can we just define what the budget was and what was spent? Because there's a number of different types of roles that were included in the listing, but I'm talking dollar amounts, Rich. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Sini. Any other questions around that? Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adley and the whole team. A lot of work went into organizing this from Saturday to today. A lot of information, a lot of good questions as always from the board. So, and to me, an extraordinary effort with all that's going on around the budget season to pull a lot of these questions together, and we know there'll be more going forward. So thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just a request, can we post this to the website for people
Yes,
to access?
yes.
Okay.
And thank you to the
Great.
board for bearing with us through a couple of presentations. Thank you.
No, thank you. All well done and all good information. So moving along, discussion of Board of Finance appropriation request for 2020-2021.
So this appropriation request is on just for consideration and for discussion as to how the board would like to proceed with. We have framed the discussion as to how you want to present and when we want to present the request for appropriation. So it's on the floor for discussion.
So I've had, Dr. Adley and I have spoken to Mr. Zagradsky, so he understands we're going through this process, and the goal is to bring this go through this process and get it to the Board of Finance to start the process of the appropriation. So I'll open it up for questions. Mr. Sini.
Do we have a final dollar amount? I saw the 2.4 million or something, but what is that? The last time we spoke, it was, I think you were going to go through all the December closings, if you will, and understand the puts and the takes. And then is that process complete at this point? And then
It will be short. Well,
so do you want to walk through this? I mean, it says in here, our recommendation at this point is to bring forward a recommendation of $2,384,934. So that's the recommendation the administration is making to bring to the Board of Finance for an appropriation.
Correct. So at Thursday's Finance Committee, we are going to recommend a number of transfers. I think it's 11 in total, which will be about $285,000 from some accounts that were underutilized due to either remote learning or school closures to kind of offset some of those costs. One of the things we flagged at the last Finance Committee meeting was the shortfall in the school lunch program because of hybrid and closures. That's a little bit higher than estimated because we did end up closing obviously that last week of December and the first week of January. So assuming that those transfers are approved by the board at its next regular scheduled meeting, the projected deficit would be about $2.38 million, and that would be the amount we'd be recommending.
And Mr. Rudel, at this point in time, a lot of discussion, but we've exhausted or we've gotten or applied for any type of state or federal type of grants or dollars.
So we have received 2 grants today so far, and they're completely received, the coronavirus relief grant and the ESSER grant. It was announced today, actually, that the state is going to open up ESSER Part 2. And that's based on the stimulus that was passed by the federal government a couple weeks ago. They have not announced what the dollar amount allocated to Darian will be, but it's about $490 million will be given to the state of Connecticut. The state's going to withhold 10% of that $490 million for themselves, and then allocate the balance of that money to the districts throughout Connecticut. So we're hoping to hear what the next couple of weeks water allocation will be. And then we'll have to go through the process of applying, getting approval, and then drawing down on that grant.
So based on your best guesstimate and crystal ball on the last time we went through this, what is the potential?
So ESSER 1 was $134,000. Okay. So I would imagine that the amount will probably be in that ballpark.
Okay, good. Mrs. Achman.
So the process requires that we request a meeting of the Board of
Yes.
Finance. So what's our schedule look like? Like, when do we think we'll be going to the Board of Finance? My recommendation would be sooner than later.
Yes.
Well, but I guess
Yeah.
the board would first need to approve the dollar amount. And then once
Right.
we approve the dollar amount, we would request a meeting of the Board of Finance for a special appropriation.
The goal is, I think, to discuss this, answer any questions, go through the Finance Committee Thursday, bring this for further discussion at the next Board of Ed meeting and action, so that once we have action on it, then we can go to the Board of Finance to request that meeting.
So the goal being, to be at the Board of Finance in February.
Correct.
Okay, so, I guess, just as one board member, I would recommend February, and if we don't have information, making it conditional or provisional, but I do think we need to get all this information in the hands of the Board of Finance sooner than later.
Yes. Mrs. Ritchie.
And then ultimately, the Board of Selectmen would refer this to, after it's approved by the Board of Finance, to the RTM, at which point hopefully we'll have more information about if we get any grant money. I don't know if the timing would work, but we could also, when we get to the RTM, if need be, we can make a reduction based on if we get any grant money.
Yeah, I think we'll have to continue throughout the process as those things change. We'll have to continue to provide updated information that then Board of Finance and RTM can make informed decision about. Mr. Sini? Okay,
Just
good.
nodding in agreement.
Okay, good.
So I guess my question on timing, and maybe after Finance Committee, we can kind of sit down and spitball a little bit, but we have a lot to bring to the RTM. We've got the budget, the administrator's contract. So I just think maybe we should plot it out a little bit, and maybe we can do that and bring that back to the full board so they know a schedule, but we have a lot to bring to them for approval.
Understood. Thank you.
The board may also consider the wording of it, because you may wish to word it such as up to and not exceeding type thing, as opposed to committing to, because we may not require all of it or not. So
good. Any other questions? Mr. Sini?
I was just going to comment. It might be a two-step process. Get the bulk of the money earlier and then
Yes.
true up at the end of the.
We've had that conversation with Chairman Zagrodsky. All right, thank you. Moving along, further discussion on transportation study.
So we left it off where we reviewed the school bus logistics options. There were a few questions of the last Richard, if you just comment on the updates to the few questions that the board members, there's a couple of just follow-up things that people wanted to know. Richard, would you mind just updating them on just what some of those were, please?
So there was a question about cluster stops and how often we use them. So if there are sidewalks and it's safe, we do recommend cluster stops. They're more at the secondary level than the elementary level. About 48% of our stops at the secondary level are cluster stops, which are 3 or more students in one stop. At the primary level, it's about 37%. We don't do cluster stops for kindergarten, which is one of the reasons why it is lower. There was a question about what are some of our peers' policy and walk radius. So Darian, obviously at the high school, is 2 miles. Greenwich is 2 miles. Stanford is 2 miles. Ridgefield is 2 miles. Fairfield and Trumbull are 1.5 miles. Wilton and New Canaan are 1 mile. And Weston is 0.5 mile. There was a question about opt-ins and opt-outs. So for a number of years, New Canaan has done an opt-in, opt-out model for 11th and 12th graders every year. If a student does opt out and they're bus eligible under their policy and they decide to opt back in during the year, they do have to allow them to opt back in. Ridgefield, Wilton, and then Darian instituted opt-in, opt-out this year due to COVID-19. Those are really the only districts in the area that did it. And then there was a question, if all the elementary schools had the same start time around 9 o'clock, how many buses would we need? We would need the one added that was added this year, plus another 2 on top of that. And then there was a question about express routes and what would happen on a snow day, because that was one of the options, and the express bus was something that would pick up the kids after the first route and then drop them off. And then at the end of the day, the kids would have to stay a little bit later and then get dropped off. It would work the same as a snow day. So if all the kids were getting dismissed at a certain time for a snow day, those kids on an express route would have to stay. The bus would have to come back, pick them up and go, which is one of the reasons why it wasn't really an optimal way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. So again, I think part of the conversation around this is if we go down to discussing any of these options, it becomes a policy conversation. So I will open it up for board conversation around kind of what we want to do with the analysis around the busing and the walk zones. Mrs. Ackman.
We could also add for safety reasons. The policy allows us to add buses for safety concerns.
Correct, which we did over the past year.
I know what I'm saying. Our policy allows the board to keep the existing policy, but add buses for safety concerns. So we could
Correct.
change the policy,
Right.
or we could say that we have a safety concern and add buses and keep the policy. I'm not weighing in which way I would go, but I'm just saying if you wouldn't have to change the whole policy if you found there's a safety concern.
Board questions? Mrs. Ritchie?
Just to clarify, the middle school is it's a 1.5 mile walk radius, is that right?
So
for the
1
middle?
mile.
1.5?
They're all set.
They're 1.5?
One.
Oh, one, the middle school.
Mrs. McCammon?
I've got two questions. The first is, Rich, is a hub model the same as cluster stops, or is a hub different?
So a hub is pretty similar. It might have a little more than 3 kids in it because they congregate in one large group. But typically districts will use cluster stop models. But we do have some instances where we have 7 or 8 or 9 kids at a stop, which would be more of a hub stop.
Okay.
Mrs. McCammon?
And the second question was that we had asked some questions about capacity and whether the capacity numbers that they gave us were sufficient for good decision making, because it was a snapshot of a day and time in November. Did they take a look? I don't know how in a pandemic environment we could get really accurate capacity, but
So this year isn't a great year for capacity. Just as an example, bus 25, which was added, I mean, we've been as low as 7 kids and as high as 20. We've seen a lot of fluctuation in terms of when kids want to ride and don't ride. We've seen instances where maybe they'll ride a couple days a week and a couple of days a week they don't ride. So this year has been a little difficult to get census data.
Mr. Cini?
I want to follow up on that, and I'll probably weigh in with my opinion. Given the status of what we're dealing with right now in the midst of a pandemic and our inability to get a good read on, demand, if you will, I would suggest, and I'm not punting this forevermore, but that we wait until more quote unquote normal times before we add any additional buses beyond what the superintendent has recommended thus far. So there's a lot of good work there, but I'm not sure I can weigh in and say there's the demand to justify, changing the busing model beyond that bus that was added again for abnormal circumstances related to construction around New Road Heights. So I would propose we wait till we get back to, full capacity at the high school. We can do a good survey and understanding what the demand might be, and then pick the model based on that. But right now, I wouldn't feel comfortable with any decision around, expanding the busing for the high school.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cini. I concur with that as I thought through this, and to Mrs. Ackman's point, like we added the bus last year over the concern around the construction over in Northern Heights. I think in this unique year where the data constantly changes, the school model constantly changes, I think we continue to monitor it via our policy. We have the ability to implement a bus if needed, but I would recommend that we also just continue to look at it and listen to the parents and look at any challenges that come up. And I think there are some board members that are looking for some additional work to be done over time, but when we get back into more of a normal school environment, see if we can update the data and also maybe even reach out and get even more input from the parents. Mr. Brown?
I just want to echo my support for your comments and Mr. Cini's comments that we need to put this off to have a better data set.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Parent?
I'm going to take the opposing viewpoint here. This is a conversation that's been had for years. I mean, I don't think this is the idea of lowering the radius is, I mean, it's something that I've heard for years going on. I don't know. I think I would be in favor of reducing it to 1.5. That's my personal opinion. I think that it is something that we could talk about, but I'm one person.
Mrs. Ackman?
So let me clarify that before I wasn't expounding a position. I was just saying that there's two ways to go. And if you're looking at safety, then I agree with Mr. Seaman's point. But if your issue is it safe for these kids to do it? It's really hard. Or is there enough room on the bus? It's really hard to do it during a pandemic year. But if you're looking at, do I think a 2-mile walk radius is too long for kids? Well, Mrs. Parent's right. The conversation has lasted forever. And so at some point the board has to decide, do they think 2 miles is a sufficient ask in Darien to ask children to walk to school? So you have to decide what problem you're solving for. If you're solving for a problem of a walk radius, there's no reason we can't make a decision. If you're solving for a specific safety or, John, I'm going to use a term, and I don't mean it, but I mean spot zoning. You can tell me I'm the wrong term to use, but if you're solving for like a spot area, then I would agree. And COVID's not the year to do it because you don't know who's riding the bus and who's attending school. But if you're solving for a walk radius isn't going away and COVID's not affecting it.
Mrs. Stein?
I was just gonna sort of echo Tara's comments, which is, we commissioned the study, we opined on the study. I don't know that pushing it off another year to look at buses, we've looked at buses over the years, we have, and ridership is gonna fluctuate. We're in an unprecedented situation, but to me, looking at it, being on this board as long as I have, to me, I agree with Sarah, a 1.5 radius for high school students, given all that we've heard and knowing that the projects are also going on, that's where my, personal inclination is.
Mr. Sini?
So I just want to clarify, I mean, I wasn't opining on the walk radius. I mean, my comments are applicable to a safety standpoint and walk radius. We have no idea what the true demand is if we change the walk radius either, or the right model to fix that based on the demand. Can you do a hub? Can you do a cluster stop? Is it a full bus? I mean, all that I think flushes out when you can get a good understanding of true demand in normal times.
But then what was the point of the study? I don't
Well,
mean to put you on the spot, but
we did the study before COVID.
But I'm hoping we're going to be post-COVID. I can't say
Well,
when, but
again, but Mr. Rudel, do you feel that the numbers in here are reflective of typical ridership, or do you feel the numbers in here are COVID ridership? Like, I hear Mr. Cheney's point about the data, but we did commission the study post-COVID. So the board approved it pre-COVID, right? But so what do you feel about numbers? I mean, you work with the transportation company every day.
So typically the buses are loaded at about 120% capacity, knowing everybody's not going to take the bus. And even with that, usually, it has about 20% occupancy on it available, even with that. So you're really looking at almost like 40% like vacancy rate based on what it's loaded at. In terms of the data this year, like I said, it's been very sporadic in terms of the ability to get a good census of what people, when people ride. So even with bus 25, which was the bus that was added this year, we don't probably have a very good read in terms of what people would ride. But I think overall, 80% capacity of a bus is typically what we would see in a normal school year. We just don't have that for the bus 25. We had assumed probably 60 kids would fill that bus, a bus of 72. And like I said, we've been as low as 7 and we've been as high in the 20s.
Mrs. McCammon?
So one of the things we talked about is not just the walk radius, but also what happens when there's a load on the busing system. And that's, I think, part of why this capacity or demand information is important. So if we have to release the school for an early snow day, we need to understand how many buses, what impact does that have? How many buses do we have? What can we provide? And one of the things we've heard is that we have students riding the bus illegally because they have to get out of school, or it's raining and we've got also issues then. So I do agree that walk radius is part of this, but I do think the problem was bigger than just walk radius. It was also what happens when there are excessive demands on the system.
Ms. McCann, I don't want to, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and I don't want to certainly contradict it, I'm just trying to think that the Renshaw Road bus became a problem with people jumping on and off because they didn't have a bus and the distance. I don't think that some children are going to here and there on a snow day do that. I don't think that's putting us over. I think that was a particular problem or challenge down there because the distance away, the terrain that they had to go up, and they were then getting on the bus. So, but I don't know that that's on a bigger level a bigger problem.
There were a couple instances where the bus was over capacity, and the high school administration, this pre-COVID, did have to remove the individuals who weren't bus eligible. It's very infrequent. It typically does happen. If it does happen, it happened during inclement weather periods. But in my time here, I can only think of 2 times it happened.
So you don't see an issue from a snowstorm, get everyone home, get everyone out of school?
No, not under the current model.
Okay, all right. Mrs. Ritchie?
I have heard stories at the Middlesex where kids who are not bus eligible are hopping on to just get closer to their house, but that was a couple years ago. So where I'm coming out is I'm stuck on the radius. I think 2 miles for the high school is just based on the infrastructure we have in town. We're not a great walking town. It needs to come down, in my opinion. And I think it probably needs to come down to 1.5 miles. But you know, at this point, I don't know when that happens, but it is a discussion we need to have at the board level. Do we need to make that decision now? It sounds like some people want to defer that decision until we have more data and we're COVID free. I'm comfortable making that decision now, but I guess, you know, it's up to the
Well, I think
board to decide.
my recommendation would not to be push it off any longer. It's on the agenda item to have a conversation. So we're going to have the conversation now. Mr. Maroney?
Rich, what is our longest bus route for the high school duration?
I'd have to confirm, but it's probably in that low 45-minute, like 44, 45-minute.
Because roughly, if you walk
Assuming everybody's on the
walk 2
bus.
miles, it's going to take you 40 minutes.
Right.
So
So
it'll be the
assuming
same
everybody's on the
distance,
bus, yeah.
same time frame.
Assuming everybody's on the bus for every stop.
With a really heavy backpack on.
Yeah, I understood. There's a difference between walking and riding, but I'm just talking about time. That was one of the other elements was time.
I just think we need to identify what problem we're solving for. If we're solving for, we've already heard that the police do not believe that there's a safety issue. So now what we're saying is, do we think there's a reasonable kind of safety issue that we want to take on? And I'll put my hat in the ring here. I think that's more problematic. Us deciding what's safe and what's not safe, because I'm going to go with the police on that. On the other hand, we've got this walk radius issue, which keeps coming up. And so I do think it's time for us to look at the 2 miles. 2 miles is pretty far, where it's not in our dirt, it's not city blocks, it's not sidewalks. I think that's what we have to look at. And I do think, Ms. McCammon, your point about capacity is important. But I think that what we're finding is because kids don't want to walk the 2 miles, or because parents are telling their kids not to walk 2 miles, they're hopping on buses, which in those kind of extreme moments is increasing capacity significantly that Rich can't plan for. So maybe a question, and Rich, I had it at my fingertips and I'm forgetting it right now, but you gave us kind of effects last spring of like, if we went to 1.5, like who did it capture and where does it capture? But maybe the board needs to look at it. I mean, we are going to ask kids to walk. It's reasonable. We ask kids at the elementary school to walk. But the question is at this point 2 miles unreasonable? And that's what I realized. At the safety question, I'm not solving for. I'm going to let the police and the traffic authority solve for it. The radius, I think, is a Board of Education decision.
I think that's the question on the table. The question on the table is the radius question. I think we've dealt with the safety issue over the last year with Dr. Adley and putting the bus in place for the construction around the heights.
So the question on the table is, do we want to continue the dialogue around the radius, the walk radius, and do we need any additional information to inform us around that discussion? And does the administration have any recommendation or insight into that?
I don't think you need any more. I don't think you need any more information. I think we've got probably enough to. Go ahead.
Well, I'll ask one more question then. One of the things, Rich, I know you said 48%, I think, if I recall the number of our stops are cluster stops. Is there an opportunity to look at hub stops, which is, as I understood, was 7 or 8 people versus 3?
So we can only do hub stops when there are a number of students within a certain distance and there are sidewalks. So we always try to group the kids as best as we can, whether it's 3, 4, 5 or more. However, adding a hub stop won't diminish the number of buses that we would need. At most, it would just shorten the length of time the students are on the bus because they're just all getting on at that one stop as opposed to the bus driving a couple minutes, stopping, driving a couple minutes and stopping again.
So at the end of the day, as we go through this process, if we're going to make a decision on the walk radius, it has an impact as we go through this budget conversation this year right now too. So Rich, I'm looking for at high level, if we went to the option to go down to 1.5 miles, 2 more buses equals how much?
So each bus is a little over $80,000.
Right.
So it'd be about $176,000.
Okay.
So to be clear, it's 3, including the one we have.
Right.
It's on one page, page 150 in the budget book.
Is already in the budget, correct?
So if we're gonna do walk radius, just so we understand the sort of how this is gonna roll out, it would have to come back to policy because then we
Right.
are changing our policy to a 1.5, and then you can get the budget impact after that, but it will have to go through policy.
Well, I mean, we could do it in a committee, you could do it as a committee of the whole. I mean, you
Yeah,
could do it
I mean,
either
we
way.
could say, we could put policy on
Yeah, but I
a
think,
regular agenda.
I guess so I think we've been talking about the students, right? Which is the Board of Education, that's what we do, we talk about students. Our other responsibility is to the taxpayers. And the question that really we come back to is the taxpayers are gonna pay for it in sidewalks or buses. Because either it's safe, either it's reasonable and the kids can walk, or what we've heard is like, well, kids are on the street and kids are doing this and you have to keep them safe. So it's either sidewalks, which aren't our purview. And at the moment, I think it's fair to say without like no casting dispersions, sidewalks are not robust in Darien. They may not need to be robust in Darien. I'm not weighing in on that. Or buses. And so buses are what's under our control, sidewalks aren't.
Mr. Maroney.
I go back to a question I asked on Saturday, though, is if we can house buses, does that change the amount? How much would that reduce the amount of a bus?
At the moment, we do not have a place in town to house buses.
So our contract is through 2024, so it wouldn't change
So we can't even
the
discuss
cost through
Dennis,
2024.
those conversations have come up over the years. The issue is there's no place. And the other issue is those buses get started in the morning to heat up and the noise and the fumes. And it's been looked at over the years since I've been in town. I've heard it and they never come to a conclusion. As we have challenges parking our own Suburbans here in this lot based on parking restrictions and stuff like that. So I don't think it's a current option that we need to spend time on right now. Mrs. Parent.
We've spent so much time talking about the mental health of children this year, and I just feel like they're already starting, to use the phrase, they're starting on their back foot already. And if we could help them out by not having them walk 40 minutes, those 100 and some odd kids, I think it's worth it. I think 2 miles is a really, really long way to walk in the morning.
So if I'm hearing the sense of the board, I think we understand where we're coming from, thanks to good board discussion around the safety. So I think it comes down to, at the next meeting, is the board prepared based on the information that they have? And give me some guidance, Deb. Do we need to take a sense of the board right now and push it to the policy committee? And then from the policy committee, bring it up to a vote at the board level? Is that the process?
What are you asking policy?
Is it,
to do?
Mr. Sini?
We've never reviewed the policy, busing policy as a board. So have the committee look through it, make sure that we're doing the right thing. And then make a recommendation to change the existing policy from 2 miles to 1.5 miles.
Mrs. Stein?
Well, I would say, look, I mean, I think that's why we're having the discussion as a full board and getting a sense of the meeting, in my opinion, to make sure everyone's on board with the policy committee reviewing the transportation policy, amending it to the 1.5, bringing it to the board for a first read, and then we also need a second read where we approve it. So there are multiple steps, and if we are going to look at the budget impact, I think we need to move it along.
Okay. Are we gonna,
I have a question. Sorry.
go ahead, Mrs. Otten.
I don't understand what policy can make the change 1.5. Yes. But I don't understand what policy, and I'm happy to meet. I'm on the policy committee, Dave, Katie, right in a row. We can do it. But I don't know what we're doing other than making the edit.
That's why I'm asking for guidance here, what the board wants to do. Everyone keeps looking up here. What does the board want to do? There's 9 of us sitting on the board here.
Oh,
So I'm trying to put forward some direction here.
He's the chair.
The sense I get is the board wants to continue the dialogue around looking at decreasing the radius to 1.5 miles. All right, so then it should go to the policy committee for further consideration and review of the policy and come back to the board. Mrs. Stein.
There is another small edit we need to make to transportation anyway. Margin, we were going to look at it tomorrow, but we wanted to sort of wait and see where we were with this to decide what kind of changes we were going to suggest. So we have to review transportation anyway as a board, to John's point. So if the sense of the meeting is okay with making those edits with the radius as well, we will have our discussion at the policy level on the other changes, bring it back to the full board and go from there.
I'll just make a note that just to make things more complicated to some degree or lesser, if you make a decision at the policy and you approve it, you're basically locking yourself into, you're committing to that's something in the budget that's definitely going to happen. And I'm concerned when we get down to the wire that other things are going to suffer because of that.
But that's something as we go through the process, which is why I asked Rich for the numbers. We have to understand as we go through the process, we're adding $176,000 to the budget this year as we go down this process. So, Mrs. Otten, you were saying something.
I just think you need a sense of the meeting. I don't think you have one. I think a few of us have said we want that, so I would.
Mr. Sini, what's your sense of what the direction you'd like to take?
From a process standpoint?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, again, I'll reiterate my point. I don't think we have the data to truly understand what the demand on the buses are going to be. But from a process standpoint, I think it's more than appropriate for the policy committee to go through the busing policy. It sounds like, again, I'm not there yet to change the policy, but maybe the sense of the meeting is, and they will review and see where we have to tick and tie the 1.5 miles and come back to the board if that's the will of the board.
Mrs. Stein?
No, I don't.
Excuse me?
Sorry. I didn't have a question. What?
No. What's your?
I thought I already gave mine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I'm for
Okay. Mr.
amending
Brown?
the walk
And
radius.
reviewing the policy.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this should be handled at policy and come back to the board. I agree with the process.
Mrs. Ockman?
I'm happy to go along with that process, and I do think we need to take up walking radius.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I do think we need to take up the issue of the walking radius.
Right.
Yeah,
Mr. Maroney?
I think the walking radius needs to be looked at. I just really struggle. Is this the year to do that?
I think, well, I'm ready to have a discussion about the walk radius.
Okay.
Let's move that along.
Mrs. McCammon?
I wish we had more data just because I agree that there's a walking radius, but I don't know. I wish we had some more, understood the cycles better before we go into this. But I am fine with the process. I think the other note I will make is that, I do think this pushes some other budget discussions, and I think that's a reality.
Correct. Mrs. Parent?
I'm happy to discuss the radius.
Hey, do we want to continue to discuss the radius now, or do you that comes back from a policy standpoint?
No, I think it goes to Katie's policy committee
Okay.
and then.
So I
it comes
think
back
the
to
sense of
board.
the board is to put this to a further, to put this to review of the policy committee.
And we will meet next week so that we're ready for the next board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions around that? All right, thank you. Next, presentation and discussion of board master agenda for February to August 2021.
Well, it's just aligned as you see it for discussion and approval, but I think it's for you, it's just for you to look at, and you get back to me if there's anything there that doesn't seem to be aligned to what we should be doing.
Okay. So it's a first kind of review for discussion. So I'll open it up for discussion. Mrs. Ritchie.
It's not on here, but I'm hoping I can ask it now. When are we bringing the administrator's contract to the RTM? Do we have a date for that?
That is in the process right now.
Okay.
We have to do that immediately.
Yes, I think
Right.
so.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Any other, Mrs. Parent?
I just have a question about I see it, there's a few updates on the strategic planning. When do you see us actually getting through that process and adopting it?
So Christopher and I have a meeting this week with Dr. Lemons to try and just reflect on people's comments and the board's comments and bring it right back. So again, I would like to try and, there's a lot going on between budgets and stuff. So just to, wherever we can get a wee bit of space to do that, because I'll actually defer to the board a wee bit. It's hard to, I need to defer to the board a wee bit of what's the appropriate forum for that, because is it a meeting? Are we at a good point just to do that in a meeting? Do we feel we can take that on as an agenda item, or does it have to be a separate one? That would be we are meeting with Dr. Lemons this week, but I'm not quite sure the forum for the next week feedback, which would be quick, but I still think it could be long.
Mrs. McCammon?
So I think from, if we look at the strategic plan, it's just what came out of the steering committee meeting. I think it is at a reasonable place. There is some discussion. However, a caveat for me is that we haven't in some ways overlaid COVID and how COVID might affect some of the planning. So I would ask you and Richard and Chris to look at whether or not COVID makes you think differently about what your operational priorities are for the next particular year, perhaps two, and whether or not that shifts anything around. And if so, that might beg a larger conversation. That's my opinion.
I would just make a recommendation too, that at this point, I would not necessarily add it to an agenda item. I would almost look for a additional meeting. I think it just needs to have that focus on it, and these meetings, I would leave it.
Then that's what we'll do then. Thank you.
Any other, Mrs. Ritchie?
Not until we're done with the budget. I mean, I don't see it on here until February 23rd. So I think once we get with the budget.
Any other further questions around the master agenda? Moving along, thank you. Action items, personnel items, appointments, resignations, and retirements. Mrs. Sion?
Right, just the resignation of Corey Gillette and the retirement of Pete Capperell, a longtime custodian at DHS.
Great. Do I have a motion to accept the personal action report? Deb Ritchie, Dennis Maroney, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey, wherever you are.
Yeah, thank you, Corey.
And Pete.
Pete.
Sorry, Pete, you too.
Michelle, are you ready for public comment?
I am. Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Julie Best, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, Julie Best, 38 Red Rose Circle, co-chair of CDSP. Very quick request. I'm pretty sure that tonight's materials were very hot off the presses, but it is difficult to follow the discussion when we don't have the information in front of us. So even if it's at the same time as the meeting started, it would be super helpful if that could get posted online and we could follow along. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Best.
Jacqueline Miller, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, thank you. Just really quick, thanks for the transportation conversation. I did want to correct some of the comparative district information. We're the only district in our DIRG that has a 2-mile walking radius for the high school. Ridgefield does in their policy say 2 miles, but their high school is located on a state road. So every student in their high school is offered bus transportation. There is no other school, no other high school in our DIRG that has a 2-mile walk radius. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you. I'll make a motion for adjournment. Motion, Mr. Maroney, second, Mrs. Ritchie. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your